I showed up to my wife's Lavish company branch opening party, only to see everyone laughing and staring at me. The 1-minute man in bed is here. Then my wife's office lover called security and said, "Get this impotent man out of here." So I walked away, quietly canceled every payment, party, trip, and pulled out my 70% company share, $97 million worth. Minutes later, my phone lit up with 56 missed calls, and someone showed up at my door. I stepped into the gleaming foyer of the branch opening in my perfectly pressed navy suit, heart pounding like a drumbeat against my ribs. In my hand, I held a small, neatly wrapped box, just a token of pride and support for Mira. I'd helped build this company from the ground up, pouring my evenings into balance sheets and lending her the quiet confidence she wore on magazine covers. I hadn't been on the guest list, but I'd arranged surprise proposals, secured investors, even negotiated the lease for this very space. Tonight was meant to be her moment. I was the surprise. The music in the hall sputtered and died the moment I crossed the threshold, as though every cord had been rewound. A hush swept over the crowd, and then laughter exploded like shattering glass. My skin prickled. Someone, one of her new team members, I guessed, yelled, "Look who's here, the 1-minute man in bed." A roar of cruel delight followed that jibe. My gift slipped in my hand. I caught it before the paper tore, but the tremor in my fingers spread to my elbows and knees. I froze, feeling the blood drain from my face. Mira stood at the head of the ballroom, in front of a backdrop emblazoned with her name and the company logo. Her gaze flicked to me for an instant. Hurt, shock, something unreadable, then cut away as if I didn't exist. My breath hitched. A flicker of desperation urged me to speak, to salvage the moment, to demand respect. But I didn't. I watched her shoulders tighten, the way she held the microphone as though it were a shield. Dorian, her office lover, stepped forward from the side, lips curving into a triumphant smirk. "Security," he said, loud enough that everyone could hear. "Get this impotent man out of here." The reverberation of his command kicked me in the gut. I felt the weight of every person's stare, 100 pairs of eyes like needles pinning me to the polished marble floor. In that instant, I understood how completely I had vanished from her world. I was no partner, no equal, just a stain on her perfect evening. 2 burly security guards materialized at my elbows. Their hands were firm on my arms, fingers wrapped in gloves that were colder than steel. They steered me forward, away from the crowd's murmurs and chuckles, past rows of white-draped tables and crystal chandeliers. Every step took me farther from the man I had been. The quiet keeper of spreadsheets and midnight coffee runs, the one who built office systems while she cultivated her personal brand. In a twisted irony, I realized the only role I was allowed now was the invisible outsider. I didn't resist. What could I say? "I'm hurt. I love you." The words felt as hollow as the applause that greeted her speech once I'd been led away. I gave one backward glance at the throng of supporters and investors gathered under soft floodlights, their expressions ranging from awkward embarrassment to gleeful satisfaction. Myra's face shone in the spotlight. Her eyes didn't meet mine. I wondered if she'd rehearsed this public disavowal with Dorian, plotted the timing so the announcement and the insult would land together like a hammer. Outside, the cool night air slapped me awake. On the steps of the venue, I paused, still in my suit and tie, the gift clutched as tightly as a lifeline. Lights from the street lamps splintered across the pavement, but they offered no clarity, only harsh illumination of the boxed present, now a symbol of my failure. I breathed in the cold, tasting resentment and disbelief. My jaw ached from holding back the retort I never voiced. Shame wove through me like a bitter perfume. I shuffled down the sidewalk, my shoes clicking in rhythm with my heartbeat. The city felt indifferent to my humiliation. Cars hurried by. Couples strolled arm in arm. Neon signs flickered announcements of convenience stores and cafes. Each step peeled away another layer of my composure until all that remained was a hollow echo of disappointment. I hadn't even argued when they ushered me out. Pride and grief warred for dominance inside me, but neither could break free. By the time I reached the curb, I realized I was still holding the gift. The wrapping paper was intact, but the ribbon lay twisted and uneven. I sank onto a low stone wall, sliding down until I was perched at its edge. The package rested in my lap, a small bright promise that felt meaningless now. I stared at the little bow, at the neat edges of the box, wondering if I should toss it into the gutter or hold on to it like proof that I still cared. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket, but not with Myra's name on the screen. Just a string of business notifications, reminders that my own company files awaited my attention. A text from an investor popped up. "Congrats on tonight's launch, Mira," followed by a smiling emoji. I let the phone slip from my hand, the screen lighting up the asphalt before the device skidded to a stop. I didn't chase it. I sat there, silent and still, feeling the weight of that cruel phrase echoing in my mind. 1 minute man. The insult stung, but it wasn't only about sex. It was about worth, about power, but most devastatingly, about love. They had stripped me of my dignity in front of everyone who mattered to her. I closed my eyes and felt the ache of rejection slide between my ribs, nestling there like a shard of glass. I wasn't angry yet. I was too stunned. I lifted the gift and held it against my chest, as if it might protect me from the truth, that in her brand new world, I no longer had a place. I sank onto the cold bench outside the gleaming branch opening, the neatly wrapped gift still resting in my lap like a fragile promise I couldn't deliver. Streetlights spilled pools of amber across the pavement, casting long, wavering shadows that flickered like ghosts of every memory I'd built with Mira. My shoulders slumped, and the weight of that small box felt heavier than any burden I'd carried for the company. I traced the edge of the ribbon with a fingertip, imagining how she might have unfurled it, cracked open the paper, and found the delicate bracelet inside, a simple silver link engraved with her initials. Instead, I sat alone, the night air crisp against my skin, and listened to the silence of a phone that ought to be buzzing with her apology. My phone did buzz, but not with her name. The screen lit up with a string of automated notifications, stock reports, reminders of upcoming board meetings, half-read emails from investors. None bore the warmth of her voice or the familiarity of a heartfelt text. I stared at the blank space where her reply should have been and felt the ache of betrayal twist in my gut. The laughter from inside the event still echoed in my ears. Harsh, triumphant, dismissive. Impotent man, they'd called me. It wasn't merely a taunt about my body. It was a declaration that I was useless, invisible, unworthy of the life we'd shared. The knowledge cut deeper than any insult I could have hurled at them. I closed my eyes and let my mind drift back to the early days, when Mira and I were a team united by vision and trust. I remembered late nights scattered across spreadsheets, her soft laughter drifting through the home office as she drafted marketing copy. I'd proofread while she sketched logos, offering quiet encouragement when she doubted her own brilliance. I financed our first lease, secured the series of seed investments, negotiated vendor discounts for her prototypes. Every crucial corner of that company bore my fingerprints, though the public face belonged to her. In her speeches, she'd extolled the virtues of innovation, the spirit of entrepreneurship, never once acknowledging the silent architect behind the scenes, me. It wasn't resentment I felt in that moment on the bench. It was grief. The grief of realizing that every sacrifice I'd made, every sleepless night spent securing lines of credit, had been taken for granted. I pictured the unopened gift tucked away somewhere inside that building, lying neglected on a satin cloth or a mahogany desk, as she basked in applause atop her platform. Anger flickered at the edges of my thoughts, but it was cold and distant. What warmed my chest was determination. I couldn't force her to open that box, but I could open a new chapter for myself, one in which my worth wasn't tied to someone else's validation. I exhaled, and a plume of breath drifted into the night. I pressed the gift against my heart, closed my fingers around it, and felt its reassuring solidity. The ribbon slipped through my grasp as I untied it, the paper glinting silver under the lamplight. My first instinct was to peek inside, to reclaim the moment I'd lost. But I paused, looking up at the building's darkened facade through the glass walls, no longer a place I could call home. The gift was hers to open, not mine to force. With a decisive motion, I gathered the wrapping and tossed it to the ground. The rustle of paper felt like a liberation. Then I held the box aloft for a moment, as if offering it back to the night, and slipped it into my coat pocket. The promise it embodied was mine to reframe, no longer a testament to pride in her accomplishments, but a reminder of everything I was capable of achieving on my own. My phone buzzed again, another email, another alert. I swiped through the messages with deliberate calm, pausing only to delete the ones bearing Myra's name in sender fields. In their place, I started typing a new note to myself. Remember your value. You built this. The words appeared on the screen like a mantra, steady and unyielding. I stood and brushed off my suit jacket, the crisp navy fabric no longer feeling like armor against shame, but rather a reminder of who I'd been and who I could become. The city's hum softened at my back as I took a step away from the bench. My path lay forward, not back to that building or the mocking eyes within. I felt the steady thrum of purpose pulse through my veins, stronger than any insult or humiliation. As I walked, the unopened gift nestled against my chest beneath my jacket. I realized that the true power lay not in exposing someone else's wrongdoing, but in reclaiming my dignity on my own terms. No longer the silent supporter, I would become the architect of my own destiny. Mira could keep her empty stage. I was heading toward a future where respect wasn't borrowed. It was earned through action and integrity. By the time I turned the corner onto the quieter street, the gift no longer weighed me down. Instead, it reminded me that kindness endured beyond rejection, that generosity could flow in every direction. I pocketed my phone, squared my shoulders against the night breeze, and began to carve out a new narrative, one where I would claim the applause that had always been rightfully mine. I returned home that evening with the gift still tucked in my coat pocket, a silent testament to the pride I once felt. The streetlights flickered as I climbed the steps to our front door, and each creak in the old wood underfoot echoed the fractures in my life. Inside, the apartment was dark and empty, save for the cold glow of the city skyline through the curtains. I set the gift on the coffee table, then moved to my desk where a neat, unassuming folder lay waiting, the one I had kept meticulously updated over the years. I flipped on the lamp and opened the folder to the first page, a printed invoice from our earliest days, dated nearly a decade ago. The currency conversion rate was scribbled in the margin, and my handwriting marked the cost of licensing fees I'd negotiated on Myra's behalf. I traced the faint pencil strokes, recalling how I had offered my savings to fund her vision when no bank would lend us a dime. My chest tightened at the memory of handing over that down payment, barely daring to hope it would become more than a gamble. I rifled through the stack. Wire transfer confirmations, digital prints of bank statements showing six-figure amounts wired from my personal account into the company's operating fund, emails with heads of wealth management praising my credit line. 70% of the capital had come from me. I remembered the late nights huddled in coffee shops, counting the dwindling funds, calculating whether we could afford another round of prototype tests. Mira had been our public face, but I was the scaffolding holding her performance aloft. Each document I pulled from the folder carried its own story. There were copies of the convertible notes I co-signed, the promissory notes I drafted to secure short-term loans, spreadsheets I built to track burn rates. I even found the insurance policies I arranged to cover product liability, dedicating hours to negotiating premiums so that our fragile startup wouldn't crumble under legal scrutiny. I flipped through every page, feeling the weight of my contributions accumulate like layers of sediment, each sheet a sedimentation of my sweat and faith. Then I reached the tax filings. My name appeared on every K-1 distribution statement, my social security number entwined with the company's EIN. I recalled the meeting when I had insisted we file as an S-corporation to maximize her personal brand's tax efficiencies, the arguments we had about dollars saved versus dollars earned. Mira had waved away my concerns, trusting me to handle the minutiae while she dazzled investors on stage. Now it struck me how invisible I had been in her success story. I closed the folder gently and opened my laptop. A blank spreadsheet waited for me, columns labeled date, description, amount, account, notes. I began entering figures. The $250,000 seed round I funded, the $1. 2 million Series A wire I initiated after negotiating a valuation I deemed fair, the $500,000 bridge loan I underwrote when investors balked. As I typed each line, the numbers formed a ledger of my devotion, a ledger that should have warranted respect but instead became ammunition for public humiliation. A new folder lay beside me, its flap fresh and crisp. On it, I printed a bold label. Final. The word felt good on my tongue, heavy with promise. I reassured myself that this folder would mark a turning point. I poured another cup of coffee and spread the chart printouts on the desk, arranging them into stacks by year. There was a certain poetry in seeing the trajectory of commitment drawn in bar graphs and pie charts, a visual testament to every sleepless night and every penny risked. I paused and looked out the window. The city lights shimmered like a constellation of opportunities yet undiscovered. The receipts and invoices were more than proof of loan agreements. They were proof of my capacity to create, to endure, to build. They reminded me that my worth was not measured by applause, but by the integrity of my actions. My throat tightened with gratitude for the experience, even as it trembled with the sting of betrayal. With deliberate care, I placed each document into the new folder, my fingers brushing embossed labels and printed ink. When the last sheet slid inside, I snapped it shut. It was compact, but it contained the sum of my partnership in the company that had turned its back on me. I laid the final folder atop the original one, as though stacking the old chapters beneath this new resolution. I leaned back in my chair, clutching the folder to my chest. A slow, sure sense of calm washed over me. I realized that the humiliation I had endured could fuel my next chapter. The receipts were a weapon not of vengeance, but of self-assertion, a reminder that I possessed the skills, the capital, and the tenacity to begin again. The gift on the coffee table caught my eye. I rose and retrieved it, lifting the ribbon to inspect the box. For a moment, I considered tossing it aside in anger, but instead I placed it gently into the final folder, as though sealing my past kindness within the ledger of my future resolve. I shut off the lamp and closed my laptop. In the hush of the apartment, I heard my own heartbeat, steady and resolute. The folder lay on the desk like the blueprint of my next move, the unspoken contract with myself to reclaim agency and dignity. I stepped away from the desk, pausing for a final glance. Tomorrow, I would begin executing the strategy outlined within these pages. Tonight, however, I simply breathed the quiet thrill of purpose, knowing that my silence would speak louder than any shout. That night, I sat alone at my home office desk, the glow of multiple screens illuminating my face as if spotlighting a stage I'd reclaimed. Silence reigned in the apartment, broken only by the rhythmic whir of the computer's fans and the soft click of my keyboard. I opened the secure credentials file I'd maintained since the company's inception, logins for finance portals, vendor management platforms, travel booking sites, even the private blockchain node where our equity controls resided. My heart thrummed, each beat echoing a mix of trepidation and steely resolve. This was my moment to act, to translate my quiet fury into decisive steps that would dismantle the empire built on my sacrifice. First, I navigated to the hotel accounts. The executive retreat in Aspen, slated for next month, was already fully booked. Luxury chalets, ski-in access, conference rooms overlooking snow-dusted pines. I clicked through the itinerary details and selected Cancel Reservation. A cascade of automated prompts confirmed my authority. The system displayed a polite apology notice, promising full refunds. I let out a small breath, tasting the bitterness of reprisal mingled with the sweetness of justice. No more would they toast champagne in my name while mocking the man who funded every reservation. Next, I turned to the vendor contracts. I accessed the procurement portal and located the executive lounge renovation at their flagship headquarters. Marble flooring, custom cabinetry, a sculptural reception desk. I marked the contract, terminate, then sent the official notice. At the same moment, I canceled 3 catering agreements for the gala dinners, stopped payment authorizations for the branded swag shipments, and retracted our commitment to a 5-year audiovisual service contract. Each cancellation triggered an email, terse notifications that didn't know the full story. I pictured the panic that would ripple through her team when they realized their polished events and white-glove services had been yanked away, leaving bare walls and empty plate carts. With the operational cutbacks in motion, I shifted to shareholder rights. I opened the equity management dashboard, where the cap table glowed with the distribution of shares. Mira owned a significant portion, Dorian a smaller slice, and I held the largest block. I activated the emergency freeze function, a feature I'd insisted upon during the company's founding precisely for moments like this. Instantly, the $97 million funding pool under my control locked down. All pending fund disbursements halted. Venture capital deposits remained in limbo. A confirmation dialog appeared. Funding pool successfully frozen. I stared at those words, feeling the thrill of power surge through me as though I'd pulled the lever on a giant vault door. I leaned back in my chair, fingertips brushing the cool metal of my desk lamp. My reflection in the dark window looked different. Eyes more focused, shoulders less weighed by doubt. I considered the dawn's board meeting, when news of the freeze would spread like wildfire. I imagined Myra's face when she realized the capital she'd trumpeted in press releases was now locked away, inaccessible. I imagined Dorian's bravado fading when he saw his own compensation and expense accounts suspended. I had been invisible for too long. Now I would be undeniable. Still in the glow of my victory, I drafted a concise notification to the board, signed with my formal digital signature. Effective immediately, pursuant to Section 7.3 of the Shareholders Agreement, I am exercising my right to freeze the designated funding pool. Further details available upon request. I didn't gloat, didn't elaborate. The words were enough. Any board member worth their salt would know what came next. Emergency calls, crisis meetings, reputations on the line. I saved the email as a draft. I would send it at sunrise, timing it to coincide with the open of business in New York. I shut down the travel and procurement tabs and reopened the company's main financial portal. I reviewed the cash flow statements. Lines of credit formerly drawn by Myra's legal name, balances earmarked for marketing campaigns, payment schedules for influencer partnerships, all now pending authorization from a cold, unyielding freeze. I printed out a summary sheet for my lawyer, planning to deliver it first thing in the morning. My lawyer had been waiting in the wings, ready to advise should I choose to enforce my rights. Now, thanks to the digital breadcrumbs I'd left, the path was clear. I closed my laptop and allowed myself a long exhale, leaning back so far the chair creaked in protest. The apartment felt warmer, more mine. The air carried the faint scent of my coffee, now cold. I stood, stretched my arms overhead, and felt the tension drain from my spine. In that moment, I recognized the magnitude of what I'd done, seized control, asserted my stake, and sent a message that silence, yes, my trademark silence, could be louder than any public outcry. At the edge of my desk lay the final folder from the night before, containing every invoice and wire transfer I'd ever made. I reached out, placed a hand on its textured cover, and tapped it gently. It felt solid, like the foundation beneath my feet. I would move forward with this document as both armor and blueprint. Before leaving the office, I retrieved my phone and composed a brief text to Marla, Myra's assistant. Morning. You and I need to talk. I didn't elaborate. She would sense the gravity. Then I locked my phone and slipped it into my pocket, heading toward the bedroom. As I crawled under the sheets, fatigue washed over me in heavy waves. Yet beneath the exhaustion, excitement shimmered. I had disrupted their world at the very core. I had reclaimed agency over my own life and finances. Tomorrow would bring chaos for them, but for me, a calm dawn of autonomy. I drifted to sleep with the hum of the city outside my window, a lullaby to accompany a man unbowed, unbroken, and ready to forge his own destiny. Morning light filtered through the hotel curtains, painting soft gold stripes across the rumpled sheets. For a moment, I lay still, listening to the distant hum of traffic below and the faint click of a hallway door. My phone lay silent on the nightstand, but I already knew what awaited me. An avalanche of missed calls and messages that would shatter the precarious calm I'd carved for myself. I steeled my resolve and sat up, swinging my legs over the edge of the bed. My suit jacket hung on a chair beside the desk. I shrugged into it, the fabric snug against my shoulders, and patted the inside pocket where I kept a copy of the board notification. From here onward, everything would happen on my terms. I reached for the phone. 56 missed calls glared at me, a retrospective on the chaos I'd unleashed. Mira, Dorian, Marla, my lawyer, and even a handful of numbers I didn't recognize. Name after name insisted on explanations. A string of voicemails ran longer than I cared to listen, pleading apologies, stammering questions, frantic promises. I let the screen settle on the voicemail list and tapped delete. Each press felt like another step away from the man they thought they could break. I returned to the message list and began deleting texts, emails from investors demanding conference calls, push notifications from project management platforms spamming urgent alerts, social media pings from colleagues tagged in crisis threads. I didn't intend to hide. I intended to choose my moment to respond. For now, silence remained my strongest statement. I rose and made my way to the minibar. The plush carpet whispered under my feet as I poured a glass of water and took a deep swallow. With my reflection in the mirror, dark circles under my eyes, expression calm but hawk-like, I felt something shift inside me. The faceless majority of my life had been reduced to panic-stricken pleas. Now the world would bend to meet the consequences of its own arrogance. Just then, my lawyer's name popped up. I answered. "They've seen it," I said, voice steady. "Funds are frozen. Aspen retreat canceled. Lounge renovations terminated. Who's next?" He inhaled sharply. "Board's convening an emergency meeting at 9. Mira is calling a special session of investors this afternoon. They're scrambling to find liquidity." I let the silence stretch. Good. Minutes later, another call came through Marla. She'd never sounded so tentative. "Are you okay?" she asked, voice cracking. "Everyone's in meltdown." "I'm fine," I replied. "Meet me in the lobby in 30. She hesitated. "What do you want?" "Answers." I hung up without another word. I showered quickly, the hot water washing away the residue of sleepless nights more effectively than any shampoo. In the mirror, I studied my face, marked by determination. By the time I stepped into the lobby, I wore not just a suit, but the armor of conviction. Marlo waited by the front desk, her eyes red-rimmed, makeup smudged in places. She straightened when she saw me, lips parting in a silent question. I offered a small nod and steered her toward the seating area. Plush armchairs faced a low table strewn with business magazines. I sat. She perched on the edge of the chair opposite me, hands twisting in her lap. "Marla," I began, voice low but clear. "Why didn't you stand up for me? When Dorian ordered security to haul me out, you let it happen." Her gaze dropped. "I'm sorry. I felt powerless. Dorian threatened to fire me if I did anything. Mira made it worse by not saying a word. You did nothing." I leaned forward. "You saw the look on her face. You saw the gutting of everything I built. You stayed silent." Her eyes met mine, brimming. "I know. I was scared. But I'm scared now, too. The board's in an uproar. Investors are threatening to pull out. Dorian doesn't know numbers. He never has. And Mira, she's lost control." A slow satisfaction spread across me. "Good." She blinked. "What are you going to do?" I closed my eyes, picturing the spreadsheet summaries in the final folder, the invoices, the wire transfers, proof in my own hand that I had been the company's backbone. "We're going to create a bridge loan," I said. "I'll authorize a $20 million interim facility to keep them afloat until they find new financing. But there are conditions." Marla's shoulders tensed. "What conditions?" I opened my eyes. "First, Mira steps down as CEO. She can take an advisory role, but no operational control. Second, Dorian's contract is terminated. He'll leave with a negotiated severance. Third, the board composition changes. I get 2 seats, including the chair of the audit committee. And fourth, we bring in an independent financial controller, someone with no ties to the old regime." She gasped. That's drastic." "It's necessary," I said. "They humiliated me publicly. They erased my contributions. They can't be trusted with my money unless they agree to these terms." Tears slid down her cheeks. "I'll tell them." I rose and offered a hand. "Thank you, Marla. You're doing the right thing." She nodded, accepting my hand. "I always believed in you," she whispered. "I just never knew how to show it." In that moment, compassion softened the sharp edges of my resolve. I squeezed her hand. "Then show it now." She stood and walked back toward the front desk, shoulders squared. I watched her go, then turned to the windows overlooking the street. The city moved on, unaware of the shifting power dynamics inside this hotel. Soon, every executive in that building would be reading my terms, scrambling to preserve their own positions. I returned to my room and poured another glass of water. The phone buzzed again, this time with a message from my lawyer. Draft agreement attached. Sign and return to counsel. I scanned the document. Lines of text laid out my conditions, my demands, my assertions of rightful authority. I signed in the signature block with a flourish. Then I took a deep breath, feeling the promise of renewal in every cell. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher, banishing the shadows. I had initiated the fallout. Now I would oversee the settlement. The balance of power had shifted, and no one would mistake my silence for surrender again. I finished my water, pocketed the phone and the signed agreement, and stepped toward the door. Today, they would negotiate with the man they tried to humiliate. Today, I reclaimed not only my money, but my dignity and my future. And as I opened the door and walked into the hall, I carried with me the quiet certainty that I would never again be invisible in a world I helped create. The knock at the door came just after dinner, sharp against the hush of the hotel corridor. I'd been reviewing the latest draft of the bridge loan agreement, ensuring every clause protected my interests, when I heard it, 3 deliberate raps that echoed through the quiet hallway. My heart skipped. I hadn't expected anyone but Marla or my lawyer to seek me out so soon. When I opened the door, the corridor's golden light framed Myra's silhouette. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun, strands escaping like tendrils around a storm cloud. She wore no makeup, and the puffiness around her eyes spoke of tears shed long before this moment. She began, her voice trembling, unsure, forfeiting the composed eloquence she once wielded on stage. I stepped aside and gestured toward the room, though my posture remained rigid. She crossed the threshold as though it were a tightrope, each step measured, uncertain. She paused in the center, gaze flitting around the minimalist decor as though expecting surprises or traps. I closed the door behind her. The foyer light cast her in soft relief, illuminating both her vulnerability and my resolve. I watched her swallow, her Adam's apple bobbing. "I didn't think you'd actually do it," she said finally, voice small. The accusation and the apology tangled together, raw and half-formed. I said nothing, instead closing the distance between us in 3 strides and dropping my briefcase onto the sofa. It landed with a thud that underscored the gravity of our new reality. She took a step back, eyes wide. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know how to stop it." The words felt thin, like an umbrella in a hurricane. I folded my arms, mouth a hard line. "You didn't try," I said. "You let them treat me like a stranger in my own marriage." Her lips trembled. She raised a hand as if to touch my arm, then paused. "I was ashamed," she admitted. "I felt helpless. Dorian, he had all the pull. He made everything glamorous and exciting. When he told security to throw you out, I couldn't move." I closed my eyes, recalling the flush of embarrassment at the party, the cold grip of the guards, the hush that followed. My chest ached with the old wound. "Shame is only powerful if you let it stay inside you," I said. "You hid your shame behind my silence." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I was dependent on you," she confessed. "I built my brand on your labor. I used your money, your expertise, your name. And then I was terrified of losing it all if I spoke up." Silence stretched between us, taut as a drawn bow. I studied her, every quiver of her lip, every flicker in her eyes, and realized I'd never seen her so exposed. The public persona had crumbled, revealing the woman beneath, flawed, regretful, desperate for redemption. Yet even in her vulnerability, I found no comfort. "I erased you," she whispered, voice barely above a breath. "I erased the man who held up my world." I exhaled, letting the tension drain from my shoulders. "You erased me in front of everyone I cared about," I replied. "That cuts deeper than any company account freeze." Her gaze dropped to the carpet. She seemed to shrink within the space, as though she wished to disappear. Then she lifted her head, resolve kindling in her eyes. "I want to fix this," she said, voice steadier. "I'll sign your agreement. I'll step down. I'll do whatever it takes." My mind replayed the clauses I'd drafted, repayment schedules, board seats, severance for Dorian, her resignation. Everything I'd demanded to protect my money and my dignity. I considered telling her there was more, an apology that went beyond legal documents, an admission that trust would take time to rebuild. But I didn't. Instead, I let her words hang in the air like an offering. "I appreciate that," I said quietly. "But this isn't about just signing papers." I folded my arms again, though the rigidity in my chest softened slightly. "It's about acknowledging what happened. In here. I placed a hand over my heart, then let it rest by my side. You need to understand the consequences of your choices, not just the financial fallout. Tears welled again. She took a hesitant step forward. I do understand, she said, voice barely above a whisper. I lost you. I lost everything that mattered. And her voice broke, but she pressed on. I will live with that. I watched her inhale, as though drawing courage from the silent room. In that moment, I recognized the hardest part. Mercy. Justice had been served by freezing funds and restructuring the board. But mercy would come from acknowledging the truth between us and deciding whether to build something new or leave the ruins behind. I sighed, the sound soft and weighted. I'll send over the revised agreement tomorrow, I said. It will include a clause about a public statement, something to acknowledge the truth of what happened, so the world can see more than just the headlines. She nodded, determination tempered with humility. I'll do it, she promised. We stood in silence again, two figures in a quiet room, separated by trust broken and perhaps beginning to mend. I realized then that this was more than a negotiation of dollars and board seats. It was the reckoning of a relationship built on unspoken debts and silent sacrifices. She pressed her fingers together, tears glimmering in her eyes. I'm sorry, she said again, softer this time. For everything. I took a measured breath, the weight of my anger and the sting of her apology settling into a fragile drift. I know, I replied. Now let's see what comes next. She offered me a small, tentative smile, a gesture that felt like the first flicker of dawn after a long night. I returned it with a nod. Then, without another word, I turned toward the desk where the folder labeled Final lay waiting, and she followed me. Together, we stood at the precipice of an uncertain future, one we would have to chart without the safety net of silence. When I walked back into the company offices the next morning, the familiar hum of printers and ringing phones had been replaced by an uneasy silence. The lobby's polished marble floor reflected a scene of quiet abandonment. Half of the reception chairs lay empty, and the display cases that once held gleaming product prototypes stood empty or dusty. I carried my briefcase in one hand and the final folder in the other, each step echoing against the walls in a way that underscored how thoroughly the landscape had changed. My arrival prompted glances from a handful of remaining staff members, their expressions flickering between relief and trepidation. I nodded once, acknowledging the tension that hung over the place like a thick curtain. Upstairs, I found Marla sitting at her desk, drumming her fingers against the mahogany surface. When our eyes met, relief washed over her features. She rose to her feet, clutching a single sheet of paper. He's here, she said softly, nodding toward the glass-walled boardroom. Dorian is waiting. The others are in the next room. I thanked her and entered the boardroom, where a circle of uncomfortable chairs faced a broad conference table. Mira sat at the head, looking small in an oversized blazer, her hair pulled into the same bun she'd worn at the hotel. Dorian stood by the window, arms crossed, but his usual smirk was gone. He seemed hollowed out, as though he knew his position was untenable. A handful of executives clustered in the far corner, whispering with furrowed brows. Investors lingered by the door, watching me like predators evaluating whether to strike. I placed the final folder on the table, its weight a silent reminder of every investment I'd made and every sacrifice I'd endured. Then I opened my laptop and projected the summary I'd prepared, a concise breakdown of capital contributions, a timeline of cancellations, and the terms of the bridge loan agreement. The slide that detailed Dorian's termination stayed on screen longest, the text stark against the white background. I looked up at him. His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Mira cleared her throat, voice wavering. We've reviewed your proposal, she began, and we're prepared to comply. A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. No one expected her to concede so fully. She glanced at me, eyes pleading forgiveness. I'm stepping down as CEO effective immediately. I will sign the repayment agreement in full, with the bonus you specified. Dorian's contract will be terminated with the agreed severance. I accept your seats on the board and the audit committee, and I understand we'll appoint an independent financial controller. As she spoke, I observed each reaction. Relief softened some faces, while others froze in indignation. Investors scribbled notes. Legal counsel leaned in to whisper with Marla. Dorian's shoulders sagged, his gaze dropping to the floor. I felt a surge of vindication, but also a flicker of something unexpected, sorrow for the ruinous path we'd taken. When she finished, I stood and closed my laptop. "Thank you," I said simply. I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the room. This isn't just about restoring operations. It's about acknowledging accountability for the humiliation I endured, for the structure I provided, for the trust that was broken. I met Myra's eyes. "Your apology is on record, and your actions will honor it." A board member cleared his throat. "What is your plan moving forward?" he asked, voice cautious. I opened the final folder and handed him a printed roadmap, 3 pages outlining the restructuring timeline, milestones for fundraising, and benchmarks for executive performance. "We'll stabilize liquidity through the bridge loan, then pursue a Series B with new investors who align with our vision," I explained. "We'll streamline operations, reduce overhead, and rebuild staff morale through transparent leadership. The independent controller will audit past expenditures and recommend best practices. We'll institute quarterly reviews for executive conduct to ensure accountability." Questions followed about projected revenues, marketing budgets, product roadmaps, but I answered each with clarity, drawing on the deep knowledge I'd accumulated over years of silent stewardship. With every response, I felt the cushion of respect grow beneath me. It was a far cry from the moment I'd been escorted out by security. Now I commanded the room. When the meeting adjourned, Mira approached me as others scattered toward their offices. She offered me a small envelope. "This is a letter," she said softly. "I asked Marla to give it to you." I opened it and withdrew a single sheet of heavy parchment. Her handwriting was looped and precise, the ink still damp with intention. I read, "You were the frame to every photo. I hung them up and forgot who held them together. I am sorry for letting you become invisible." I felt the words settle into my chest like a warm ember. I folded the letter and placed it in my jacket pocket. Myra's eyes brimmed. "I know it doesn't fix everything," she whispered, "but it's the truth." I nodded, a quiet acknowledgement passing between us. Then I turned toward the door, folder in hand. Investors and executives paused to offer tentative handshakes and polite nods. I accepted each greeting with a calm smile, feeling the weight of my isolation lift with every introduction. Passing Dorian, I held out my hand. His eyes flicked up, meeting mine. For a moment, I saw regret in those dark depths. He took my hand, and our grip was brief but honest. "Thank you," he mouthed, no sound escaping his lips. Outside the boardroom, I inhaled deeply, the recycled office air tasting sweeter now that we'd confronted the past. The halls felt alive again, as though the company had exhaled after a long nightmare. Staff members re-emerged from corners, some offering shy smiles, others nodding in respect. Marla caught my eye and gave a small thumbs up. Her loyalty had endured through fear, and now it shone in her quiet confidence. I paused at the reception desk and watched the prototype displays, a new line of wearable tech humming with potential. In that moment, I realized that the true reckoning wasn't simply the money I reclaimed or the board seats I secured. It was the restoration of integrity. We had stripped away the facade and discovered that beneath it lay purpose and promise. I straightened my jacket and continued down the hallway toward my former office, the final folder pressed against my side as though it were a compass guiding my way. I knew the road ahead would be challenging, filled with negotiations and deadlines and the occasional echo of past betrayals. But I also knew that, for the first time in a long while, I was steering the ship rather than following in its wake. And as the office doors slid closed behind me, I felt the quiet triumph of a man reclaimed, no longer a forgotten supporter, but a visible architect of his own destiny. 2 weeks later, I found myself at the threshold of Soul Weave's modest office, a converted storefront with brick walls painted in warm neutrals, string lights overhead, and a single sign declaring Soul Weave, weaving solutions together. It was a far cry from the marble lobbies and glass towers I'd left behind, but something in its simplicity called to me. I carried a manila envelope tucked under my arm. Inside, the investment agreement I designed to give this small startup the runway it deserved. I stepped inside, the gentle hiss of the door announcing my arrival. A woman looked up from a cluster of soldering irons and circuit boards on a workbench. She paused, eyes widening in recognition. "Is that?" she began, voice catching. It is. You're the guy from Nexera, right? The one they humiliated. I offered a small smile. That's me. I extended the envelope. I'd like to invest. She blinked, uncertainty flickering across her features before melting into gratitude. I don't know what to say. I gestured to the chair behind me. Just sit. Tell me where you need support. She slid into the seat, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I'm Ava, she said, voice soft but firm. I've been working on sustainable fiber synthesis, plant-based polymers that mimic spider silk. I pitched it to Mira and her team years ago. They laughed it off as a hobby project, said it didn't fit their brand narrative. I kept going alone, cobbling together equipment, teaching myself structural modeling on nights and weekends. I nodded. Persistence pays. I placed the envelope on the table. This will cover your next 18 months of R&D, equipment upgrades, and pilot manufacturing. Her eyes filled with tears. You're giving me everything I asked for years ago. I'm giving you what you earned, I said. Your idea had legs. I regretted not supporting it before. Ava exhaled, relief evident in her slumped shoulders. She opened the envelope and skimmed the agreement. Terms fair, no hidden clauses, interest rates designed to foster growth rather than extract profit. When she looked up, her smile lit the room brighter than the overhead lights. Thank you, she said simply. I leaned back, watching her unfold the possibilities before her. I'd like to be a silent partner, I added. I'll advise when needed, but this is your vision. She nodded, conviction shining in her eyes. I wouldn't have it any other way. Over the next hour, we talked shop, polymer matrices, supply chain challenges, pilot batch targets. She showed me prototypes, fine threads that glinted in the afternoon sun, strong enough to support weight but soft to the touch. I held one strand between my fingers, feeling the tensile strength she had coaxed from humble plant matter. It was remarkable. When our meeting ended, Ava walked me to the door. She paused in the entrance, turning back. You okay? She asked, as though testing whether I belonged in this world of startups and scrappy entrepreneurs. I looked around at her workspace, tools neatly arranged, whiteboards covered in formulas, a stack of journals containing her experimental data. More than okay, I said. I feel alive. She smiled, and I realized it was the first genuine smile I'd seen from anyone in weeks, untainted by fear or obligation, born of gratitude and shared purpose. I slipped out into the street, the sun warm on my back. I felt lighter than I had in months, no longer tethered to the ruins of the old company, but propelled forward by the promise of something new. Over the next several days, I checked in on Solweave's progress. Ava sent weekly updates. Images of new reactor prototypes, video clips of fiber strength tests, notes on regulatory filings. Each email carried an undercurrent of excitement, reminding me of the thrill I once felt helping build Myra's company. But here, every success was shared, every challenge met with collaborative problem-solving rather than ego-driven directives. One morning, I walked into Ava's lab unannounced. She looked up from the microscope and grinned. Hey, you, she said. I was just about to run fiber alignment tests. Want to see? I nodded eagerly. She invited me to a workbench where a small spool of fiber awaited. She threaded it through a digital tensiometer and with a flourish pressed start. The device hummed, measuring tensile strength as the fiber stretched. The readout climbed higher than previous tests. Ava raised her eyebrows in triumph. That's over 1.2 gigapascals, she said. Stronger than steel. I whistled softly. You've done it. She looked at me, pride shining in her eyes. We did it. Her use of we resonated deep within me. I realized that I was no longer the isolated financier or the sidelined husband. We were partners, collaborators. I smiled, feeling the warmth of true camaraderie. That evening, as I walked back to my studio apartment, I reflected on how different this felt from my life with Mira. There were no boardrooms, no orchestrated presentations, no empty applause. There was only purpose, mutual respect, and the quiet satisfaction of shared achievement. I pulled out my phone and drafted a text to Marla, who'd become one of my few confidants, invested in Solweave. It feels right. I pressed send and slipped the phone into my pocket. The city lights flickered on around me, but they no longer represented the hollow glamour of a world that had rejected me. Instead, each one was a beacon, a reminder that there were untold stories waiting for someone to believe in them. And as I strolled through the neighborhood, I understood that I wasn't just escaping Myra's world. I was weaving a new one, thread by thread, powered by integrity, respect, and the unwavering belief that true success is built together. I glanced down at my phone as I stepped into the modest cafe, the worn leather case feeling warmer against my palm than any boardroom's polished countertop. Mira was already seated at a small, round table by the window, the morning light catching the gold flecks in her coffee and the tear tracks still faint on her cheeks. I lowered myself into the chair opposite her, setting the briefcase between us like a barrier I intended to keep sturdy. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The bustle of baristas and the hiss of espresso machines filled the space, but around our table everything felt hushed, as though time had paused to witness this meeting. Mira reached out and folded her hands on the table, fingers trembling slightly. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me here," she said, voice steadier than I would have expected. I nodded and retrieved the legal papers from my briefcase, their crisp pages outlining the repayment terms for the $97 million I'd frozen. The ink was still fresh. I slid the documents across to her, watching them land with a soft flutter. "These are the final terms," I said. $97 million plus a 10% bonus, to be repaid over the next 2 years, interest-free. You step down, relinquish your equity and operational control, and I receive the board chair position. She picked up the top sheet and ran her fingertip along the signature line. Her gaze flicked up at me, meeting my eyes with an intensity that reminded me of early days when we'd shared a single laptop and a single dream. "I understand," she whispered. "I'll sign." She paused, pen poised like a reluctant bird about to take flight. "But before I do, I need to say something more." I leaned back, maintaining my stillness as she took a breath. "I don't expect this to fix everything," she said, voice soft but determined. "I know I destroyed your trust, and I can't undo that. But I want you to know that I finally see the cost of my ambition. I lost sight of who you are and what you gave me. I hung the pictures of our success on the wall and forgot who built the frame." Her words landed in my chest like a fist wrapped in velvet. I felt the tension loosen slightly, though I kept my expression unreadable. "Your apology is noted," I said. "What matters now is action. The world needs to know the truth." She nodded and slid the repayment and resignation papers toward me, signing them with controlled strokes. Then she reached into her purse and withdrew another document, a short public statement, drafted on my instructions. It read, "To our community, I acknowledge that I relied on my husband's unwavering support and unfounded sacrifices to propel this company forward. I apologize for the harm caused by my silence and mistreatment. I stepped down to make amends and ensure transparency moving forward." Mira handed me the signed letter, her hand lingering on the edge of the table. "Will you release these tomorrow?" she asked. "Yes," I replied. "I'll publish at 8 a.m. Eastern." The clatter of cups and the murmur of conversation around us resumed its normal rhythm, and the moment of stillness faded. We both looked out the window, watching pedestrians pass along the street, oblivious to the seismic shift our agreement would trigger. She folded her hands again. "I don't know who I am without the title," she confessed, voice fragile. "But I want to learn." I studied her, bruised but resolute, humbled yet hopeful. "Then learn," I said. "Take responsibility. Find a new purpose. I'll withdraw my support for extending operations in your direction, and you can forge your path from scratch." She nodded, tears welling once more, and offered a faint smile. "Thank you," she said, voice thick with gratitude. I remained silent, allowing the weight of our exchange to settle between us. The cafe's atmosphere felt lighter now, as though honesty had lifted a cloud. I stood, gathering the signed papers and my briefcase. As I walked away, I heard her call my name. I paused, turned, and she mouthed, "Good luck." I offered a curt nod and stepped into the sunlight of a future no longer defined by shared illusions, but by the clarity of truth and the promise of new beginnings. I moved into my new studio apartment the day I finalized the last of the company documents, 10 feet by 12, with a window overlooking a brick courtyard. The air felt different here, lighter, as though it carried room to breathe rather than the stale heaviness of boardroom politics. There were no receptionists to impress, No assistants to fetch coffee, just blank walls waiting for me to leave my mark. I carried in a single cardboard box containing essentials: a laptop, notebooks, my favorite fountain pen, and the silver bracelet I'd meant to gift Mira. I placed the box on the hardwood floor, paused, and then set it aside unopened. I unpacked slowly, arranging books on a shelf, rolling out my yoga mat, hanging a handful of abstract prints I'd picked up at flea markets. Each task felt grounding, a reminder that life continued beyond spreadsheets and shareholder votes. I made coffee on a small hot plate, the aroma filling the room in comforting swirls. As I sipped from a chipped mug, I glanced out the window at the courtyard below: potted plants, wrought iron chairs, and a stray cat weaving through the shadows. It felt like an actual home. In the days that followed, I settled into a new rhythm. Mornings began with stretching and journaling. I tracked daily wins and challenges, setting intentions rather than ticking off endless to-do lists. I spent afternoons meeting with entrepreneurs at local cafes, offering mentorship on financial planning and growth strategies. Their gratitude was genuine and unguarded. No hidden agendas, just people striving to turn ideas into reality. I felt my pulse quicken with each "thank you" and each spark of hope in their eyes. One afternoon, I attended a workshop on social impact investing. The organizer introduced me to a network of investors focused on clean energy, social housing, and educational startups. Their values aligned with mine, profit intertwined with purpose. I spoke passionately about SoulWeave's sustainable polymers and offered insights from my own experiences. A woman in the back, her name tag reading Naomi, approached me afterward. She ran a venture fund that backed female founders in emerging markets. "We need someone with your integrity," she said, handing me her card. "Let's talk." That evening, I returned to my studio, heart alight with possibility. I brewed tea and opened my laptop, drafting an email to Naomi outlining potential collaborations. The silver bracelet sat on the desk beside me, a relic of a past chapter. I reached out, touched the cool metal, and slid it into a drawer. Some gifts are better held for oneself, as reminders of lessons learned rather than unfulfilled promises. News of Myra's empty office filtered to me via a brief text from Marla, photo attached. "Your gift still sits on her desk." I clicked the image. The dark mahogany desk gleamed under soft overhead lights, the unopened box positioned near the center. I stared at it, but the urge to respond vanished. Instead, I tapped a quick reply. No reply needed. That night, I dreamed of boardrooms dissolving into open fields, of colleagues transformed into curious students, and of a man unbound by titles. I woke before dawn, heart steady, and slipped on running shoes. I jogged through the silent streets, the city's pulse a low hum beneath my feet. When I returned, sweat cooling on my skin, I poured water into a glass and sat by the window. The apartment felt alive with fresh possibilities. Over the next weeks, I balanced mentoring sessions with new investment discussions. I listened more than I spoke, asking questions that helped others find their own solutions. I learned as much from them as I shared. Each connection reinforced the belief that success is not measured in headlines or high-rise offices, but in the impact morning, you inspire. An envelope arrived at my door, a letter from Mira. My hand hesitated before I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, the same gold-flecked paper she once used for press announcements. Her handwriting was smaller now, unhurried. She wrote that the company had reorganized under new leadership, that she was exploring philanthropic work, and that she hoped, someday, we could reconnect without the weight of past mistakes. She closed with, "I wish you peace." I folded the letter and placed it beside the drawer where the bracelet rested. I didn't reply. In that moment, I recognized that closure can come without closure, acceptance without reconciliation. I stood, walked to the drawer, and slid it closed. The studio was quiet but full, every corner reflecting the man I'd become. I poured another cup of coffee, settled into my favorite chair, and opened my laptop. On the screen, an email draft to Naomi awaited. I typed a subject line: collaboration opportunity. Below, I began outlining ideas for a joint fund to support social enterprises. My fingers moved with purpose, guided by experience and tempered by humility. And so I continued, no longer the silent supporter in the shadows, but but a visible architect of positive change. The world had forgotten me once, but in rediscovering myself, I realized that I never needed their applause to prove my worth. My conviction, integrity, and quiet determination were applause enough. Tonight, as streetlights flickered on and the city settled into darkness, I felt genuinely at home in my own skin and ready for whatever came next. I showed up to my wife's office with a flower bouquet and a flight ticket to Paris for Valentine, only to see my wife's co-workers congratulating her on her engagement with the CEO. Then my wife kissed him and flashed the diamond ring, while everyone cheered. So I walked away, quietly canceled every payment, trip, and pulled out my 83% company share, $557 million worth. Minutes later, my phone lit up with 356 missed calls, and someone showed up at my door. So here's the thing about Valentine's Day. It's basically a corporate conspiracy designed to make guys like me panic buy overpriced flowers and pretend we're romantic geniuses. But after 7 years of marriage to Sophia Monroe, I figured I'd actually earned the right to do something genuinely thoughtful. Hence why I'm standing in the marble and glass cathedral that is Leoreteca's lobby at 9 a.m. sharp, clutching a bouquet of red roses that cost more than most people's car payments and 2 first-class tickets to Paris that I'd been planning for months. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. Adrian, you romantic genius, surprising your wife at work like some kind of rom-com hero. Trust me, that's exactly what I was thinking too. 7 years of marriage, and I wanted to recapture that spark from the early days when she'd look at me like I hung the moon instead of like I forgot to take out the trash again. The Leoretec lobby is one of those aggressively modern spaces that screams, "We have money, and we want you to know it." Floor-to-ceiling windows, sleek reception desk that probably costs more than a house, and enough chrome to blind a small aircraft. The kind of place where you feel underdressed even when you're wearing a $1,000 suit. Which, for the record, I absolutely was. I'd rehearsed this moment in my head about 50 times. Walk in, find Sophia, present flowers with a flourish, reveal the Paris tickets like some kind of magician pulling rabbits out of hats. Maybe she'd tear up a little. Maybe she'd kiss me right there in front of everyone. Maybe we'd have one of those moments that reminds you why you fell in love in the first place. But here's the thing about life. It's got a twisted sense of humor that makes Murphy's Law look optimistic. The first clue something was off? The noise. Instead of the usual corporate hum of keyboards clicking and coffee machines gurgling, I heard clapping. Like, enthusiastic clapping. The kind you hear at graduation ceremonies or when someone announces they're pregnant. The second clue. The phones. Every single person in that lobby had their phone out, cameras flashing like I'd walked into a paparazzi convention. Which, let me tell you, is not exactly the intimate romantic moment I was going for. And then I saw it. Or rather, I saw them. Right there in the center of the atrium, surrounded by what looked like half the company's workforce, was my wife. Sophia Monroe, in all her perfectly coiffed, designer-dressed glory. And she wasn't alone. Damien Locke, CEO of our biggest competitor, tall enough to play basketball and groomed like he stepped out of a men's magazine, was down on one knee, in front of my wife, sliding what looked suspiciously like a diamond ring onto her finger. For a second, I thought maybe I was having some kind of stress-induced hallucination. Maybe I'd finally snapped from too many 18-hour work days and my brain was playing tricks on me. But then Sophia leaned down and kissed him. Not a quick peck, not an awkward business relationship thing. A full-on, passionate, "I've been waiting for this moment my whole life" kiss. The crowd erupted. "Congratulations," they chanted, like they were at a sporting event and their team had just scored the winning touchdown. Phones kept flashing. Someone might have actually thrown confetti, though that could have been the stress-induced hallucination thing again. I stood there like a statue, still holding my romantic gesture supplies, watching my marriage implode in real time while surrounded by what felt like the world's most enthusiastic audience. The roses in my hand suddenly felt ridiculous, like showing up to a gunfight with a water balloon. The Paris tickets might as well have been Monopoly money. 7 years of marriage, and apparently I'd missed the memo about the divorce. Here's what's really messed up. I didn't scream. I didn't drop the flowers dramatically and storm out like some scorned lover in a soap opera. I didn't even clear my throat loudly or make one of those passive-aggressive comments that would have at least acknowledged my existence. I just stood there, processing the fact that my wife was currently making out with another man while wearing his engagement ring. And somehow the most surreal part was that everyone else seemed totally fine with this situation. Like they'd all gotten an invitation to this little celebration, and somehow mine had gotten lost in the mail. Chloe Tan, the receptionist, caught my eye from behind her desk. Poor kid looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. She gave me this bewildered look that clearly said, "Sir, I have no idea what's happening here, but I'm pretty sure it's not good." I nodded at her, because apparently my brain had decided that polite acknowledgement was the appropriate response to watching your marriage end in front of a live studio audience, and turned around. The New York wind hit me like a slap in the face as I walked back onto the street. February in the city is brutal on a good day, but when you're carrying dead roses and useless plane tickets, it feels downright vindictive. I stood there on the sidewalk for a moment, watching people hurry past in their winter coats, everyone wrapped up in their own little worlds, completely oblivious to the fact that mine had just gotten nuked from orbit. The funny thing about betrayal is how quiet it is in the moment. You'd expect violins or dramatic music or at least some kind of soundtrack to mark the occasion. Instead, you get car horns and the distant rumble of the subway and the sound of your own breathing, which suddenly seems way too loud. I looked down at the roses in my hand. Still perfect, still red, still completely pointless. The Paris tickets were getting soggy from the humidity, probably ruined already. 7 years of marriage, and this is how it ends. Not with a fight or a conversation or even a text message. With a public engagement party that I apparently wasn't invited to. Welcome to my life, folks. Population: one very confused, very betrayed, and very pissed off husband who just learned that his wife has been auditioning for a replacement. So there I was, back in my penthouse like some kind of wounded animal returning to its cave. 34th floor of a building that cost more than most small countries' GDP, with a view of Manhattan that real estate agents describe as breathtaking, and I usually call Tuesday. But today it looked like a concrete graveyard, and I felt right at home that I set those pathetic roses on the kitchen counter like I was laying flowers on a grave. Which, let's be honest, I basically was. The marriage was dead. I just hadn't gotten the death certificate yet. The Paris tickets sat next to them, soggy and useless, like a cruel joke the universe had decided to play on me. Here's the thing about being betrayed. Your brain goes through this weird process where it tries to make sense of something that fundamentally doesn't make sense. Like, how do you wake up married and go to bed? Whatever the hell I was now. Divorced? Separated? Publicly humiliated? There really should be a better word for guy whose wife just got engaged to someone else while he was holding Valentine's gifts. But then something clicked. Maybe it was the shock wearing off, or maybe it was the 3 fingers of Glendronach I'd just poured myself. 25-year-old single malt that costs more per ounce than most people make in an hour. Whatever it was, my brain shifted from wounded husband mode to pissed-off businessman mode. And that's when I remembered something very important. I walked over to my office. Because yes, I have an office in my apartment. Because when you're worth what I'm worth, you can have whatever the hell you want, and stopped in front of my favorite piece of art. It's this gorgeous oil painting of the Brooklyn Bridge at sunset, commissioned from some artist in Soho who charges ridiculous amounts to paint things you can see for free if you just walk outside. But the painting isn't the point. The painting is what's hiding the safe that I punched in the code, Sophia's birthday, because I'm apparently a sentimental idiot, and pulled out a folder labeled Core Assets. Boring name for what might be the most important documents in my life, but I've always believed in understated file organization. Inside that folder were the papers that told the real story. The incorporation documents for Leoratech, dated 7 years ago. The patent filings for the core technology that makes everything work, filed under my name, Adrian Kwan. The funding receipts showing exactly who put up the initial capital. The ownership structure that everyone seems to have conveniently forgotten, 83%. That's how much of Leoratech I own. $557 million worth of company, and I own 83% of it. Sophia? She owns exactly 0%. She's an employee, a very well-paid, very public-facing employee, but an employee nonetheless. The face of the company, as the board likes to say. The one who goes to conferences and gives interviews and poses for magazine covers, while I do the actual work of keeping the lights on. Don't get me wrong. She's good at what she does. Brilliant, even. She can work a room like a politician, charm investors like a snake oil salesman, and make our boring-as-hell enterprise software sound like the most exciting thing since sliced bread. But at the end of the day, she's the actress, and I'm the director, producer, and guy who owns the theater that I spread the documents across my desk like I was planning a military campaign. Which, come to think of it, I basically was. 7 years of letting my wife take credit for my work, 7 years of standing in the background while she got the applause, 7 years of being the technical guy while she was the visionary. Well, congratulations, Sophia. You just declared war on the guy who built the kingdom you're trying to rule. That I opened my laptop and logged into the Leoritech financial systems. Not the pretty dashboard that the board sees, not the simplified reports that get sent to investors. The real systems. The ones that actually control where the money goes. See? Here's something most people don't understand about modern businesses. Everything runs on access codes and permissions and digital signatures. You can't just walk into a bank with a briefcase and demand cash like some kind of movie villain. Everything is ones and zeros, passwords and protocols. And guess who designed all those protocols? Your boy Adrian. That's who I started with the corporate credit cards. Sophia's card, which she uses for everything from business lunches to personal shopping sprees. Frozen. Damien's company card, which somehow ended up linked to our expense system during some strategic partnership nonsense. Also frozen. Then I moved on to the operational accounts. The money we use for payroll, vendor payments, office expenses, basically everything that keeps Leoritech running on a day-to-day basis. I didn't freeze them, exactly. That would be nuclear. But I did implement what I like to call emergency financial protocols. Basically, any expense over $1,000 now requires my personal approval. Any transfer to external accounts needs my digital signature. Any attempt to access our reserve funds triggers a security review that goes straight to my phone. Is it petty? Maybe. Is it legal? Absolutely. Is it going to make Sophia's life very complicated very quickly? Oh, you bet your ass it is. My phone started lighting up like a Christmas tree. Text messages, missed calls, voicemails piling up faster than I could count. 20 missed calls became 40. 40 became 100. The notification sounds were so constant, it was like having a very angry cricket living in my pocket. I picked up the phone and looked at the caller ID. Sophia. 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 Damien. Elena, Sophia's assistant. Janet Cross, our CFO. Some number I didn't recognize. Sophia again. I flipped the phone face down and took another sip of my scotch. Here's the thing about scorched earth tactics. Once you start, you have to commit. You can't blow up the bridge and then complain that you can't get across the river. And right now, I was feeling very committed to some bridge burning. I pulled up our travel booking system and canceled the company's upcoming executive retreat to Aruba. The one Sophia had been planning for weeks, the one that was supposed to be a team-building exercise for senior management. Funny how team-building exercises always seem to happen in tropical locations with 5-star resorts. Gone. Canceled. Refunded to the company account, which was now under my direct control. I canceled the catering contract for next week's investor presentation. The one with the artisanal cheese boards and champagne fountains that costs more than most people's annual salary. Gone. The premium parking spaces that Sophia had somehow convinced accounting were business necessities. Reverted to standard employee parking. The corporate membership to that exclusive gym downtown where she does networking lunches. Suspended pending review. By the time I was done, I'd systematically dismantled every perk, every convenience, every little luxury that Sophia had built into her corporate lifestyle. And the beautiful part? It was all completely legal, completely within my rights as majority owner, and completely devastating to someone who'd gotten used to living like a queen. My phone was still buzzing like an angry hornet. The number of missed calls had to be in the hundreds by now. But I just sat there, surrounded by the paperwork that proved I owned this empire, sipping my scotch and watching the city lights twinkle below. Tomorrow was going to be very interesting. Morning came with the kind of silence that feels dangerous. You know that moment in horror movies right before the killer jumps out? That's what my penthouse felt like at 7 a.m. No buzzing phone. I'd finally turned the damn thing off around 3 a.m. when the missed call count hit something like 347. No traffic noise filtering up from 34 floors below. Just me, my coffee machine, and the lingering taste of last night's scotch that I was halfway through my first cup of actually decent coffee. None of that green smoothie bullshit Sophia had tried to convert me to, when the intercom crackled to life. Mr. Kwan, Patrick Delgado, the concierge, sounded like he was walking on eggshells. Patrick's worked this building for 15 years, seen everything from messy divorces to federal investigations, and he's got this professional poker face that could make a casino dealer jealous. But today he sounded nervous. Yeah, Patrick, what's up? Sir, there's a young woman down here in the lobby. Says she works for your wife, Mrs. Monroe. She looks pretty distressed, sir. Should I send her up? Elena Vargas. Had to be. Sophia's assistant, 26 years old, fresh out of NYU with a business degree and enough optimism to power a small city. Kid's been working for Sophia for 2 years, doing everything from scheduling meetings to picking up dry cleaning, and she genuinely believes she's learning from a visionary. Poor thing has no idea she's been working for a professional bullshit artist. Send her up, Patrick. Thanks. 5 minutes later, my doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Elena looked like she'd been hit by a truck. Her usually perfect makeup was streaked with mascara. Her blonde hair was doing this weird thing where it looked like she'd been running her hands through it all night, and she was clutching an overstuffed handbag like it contained the secrets of the universe. Mr. Kwan, she said, and her voice cracked like she was 13 years old. I'm so sorry to bother you, but something's wrong with the systems and I don't know what to do, and Ms. Monroe isn't answering her phone, and, Elena. I held up a hand. Breathe. Come in. She stumbled into my living room like a lost tourist, looking around at the minimalist furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows with the kind of awe that said she'd never been in a place that cost this much per square foot. Which, let's be honest, she probably hadn't. Coffee? I asked. Yes, please. Thank you. I haven't slept, and she collapsed onto my couch like her legs had given out. I poured her a mug and handed it over. She wrapped her hands around it like it was a life preserver. Okay, I said, settling into the chair across from her. What's going on? The floodgates opened. The payroll system is frozen, she said, words tumbling out like she'd been holding them in all night. Nobody got paid this morning. Not just the executives, nobody. The cleaning crew, the security guards, the junior developers. Jenny from accounting called me crying because her babysitter bounced, and she can't afford another one if she doesn't get paid today. She took a shaky breath and kept going. And the investor summit. The one next week with the Goldman Sachs people? The venue called and said our deposit got reversed. Something about insufficient funds, which doesn't make sense because we had $12 million in the operational account last week. I sipped my coffee and said nothing. Elena's eyes were getting wider and more panicked. And then Ms. Monroe's corporate card got declined. At Starbucks, Mr. Kwan. Starbucks. She was trying to buy coffee for her meeting with the venture capital firm from Boston, and her card got declined for a $6 latte. She called me screaming, but I don't understand what happened. I checked with the bank, and they said the account is under some kind of administrative hold. What about Damien's card? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Same thing. He tried to pay for lunch yesterday, some fancy place in Midtown, and his card got denied too. The restaurant manager had to come over and everything. It was so embarrassing. Damien called me personally, which never happens, and he was furious. He kept asking if there was some kind of system glitch. Elena set down her coffee mug and looked at me with those big, desperate eyes that people get when their world is falling apart and they can't figure out why. Mr. Kwan, is it a glitch? Because I've been up all night trying to figure out what went wrong, and I can't find anything. The systems look normal from my end, but nothing's working. It's like someone just turned everything off. I stood up and walked over to my desk, pulled out a cream-colored envelope with Elena's name written on it in my careful handwriting. I'd prepared it the night before, during my scotch-fueled strategic planning session. Elena, I said, handing her the envelope. I need you to give this to Sophia. Tell her she has 24 hours. She took the envelope with trembling hands. 24 hours for what? To resign as CEO, publicly acknowledge that I'm the founder and majority owner of Leoratech, and begin repaying the personal expenses she's charged to the company over the past 3 years. The amount comes to approximately $473,000. It's all itemized in the letter. Elena's face went white. Like vampire white. Mr. Kwan, I don't understand. Is this about yesterday? At the office. Smart kid. Smarter than I'd given her credit for. Elena, let me ask you something. Did you think it was normal? Your boss getting engaged to another man while her husband was standing in the lobby holding flowers. She looked down at her hands. I know, sir. I thought it was really weird. But Ms. Monroe said you two were separated, that you'd agreed to an amicable divorce, and that the engagement was just timing. Did she tell you that before or after I walked in? Elena's silence was answer enough. Here's the thing, Elena. Leora Tech isn't our company. It's my company. I founded it. I built it. I own 83% of it. Sophia is an employee. A very well-paid employee, but an employee nonetheless. And as of yesterday, she became an employee who's breaching her fiduciary duty to the company and engaging in activities that directly harm shareholder interests. I sat back down and looked at this kid who was probably making 35 grand a year and living in a studio apartment in Queens, working 60-hour weeks for a boss who charges designer handbags to the company expense account. The system isn't glitched, Elena. The system is working exactly as I designed it to work. Every account freeze, every declined card, every suspended service. That's me protecting the company from further financial abuse. Elena stared at the envelope like it might bite her. Should I tell her it's not a glitch? Tell her the truth, I said. Tell her that her husband, ex-husband, whatever we're calling it now, isn't the pushover she thought he was. Tell her that actions have consequences, and that some bridges, once burned, don't get rebuilt. She stood up on unsteady legs, clutching the envelope in her oversized purse. What about payroll? What about the employees who didn't do anything wrong? Payroll will resume as soon as Sophia signs the resignation letter that's in that envelope. The employees will be fine. It's management that needs to worry. Elena nodded, but she looked like she was about to cry again. Mr. Kwan, I know this isn't my place, but are you okay? And that's when I realized something. This 26-year-old assistant, who probably couldn't afford health insurance, was the first person to ask me that question. Not Sophia, not the board members, not any of the people who were supposedly on my side. Just Elena, who was stuck in the middle of a war she didn't start. I'm fine, Elena. Better than fine, actually. For the first time in years, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. She walked to the door, then turned back. For what it's worth, Mr. Kwan, I always thought you were the real genius behind Leora Tech. Ms. Monroe talks a good game, but you're the one who actually makes things work. Smart kid. Really smart kid. After she left, I poured myself another cup of coffee and watched the city wake up 34 floors below. Somewhere out there, Sophia was about to get a very unpleasant surprise that I couldn't wait. Here's something they don't tell you about declaring war on your wife. The waiting is the worst part. It's like sitting in a doctor's office, except instead of finding out if that weird mole is cancerous, you're waiting to see how spectacularly your marriage is going to explode. That I spent most of the day doing what I do best, working. Locked myself in my home office, reviewed patent applications, analyzed market reports, basically anything that required enough brain power to keep me from obsessing over whatever nuclear meltdown was happening at Leora Tech headquarters. My phone stayed off. The landline stayed unplugged. For all intents and purposes, Adrian Kwan had vanished from the face of the earth. Around 6 p.m., I ordered Thai food from that place on Columbus that doesn't care if you're worth $500 million or living paycheck to paycheck. They just make really good pad Thai and leave you alone. I ate dinner watching the sunset paint Manhattan in shades of orange and gold, trying to pretend this was just another Tuesday instead of the day I nuked my life from orbit. But by 11 p.m., I was pacing. 34 floors up, with a view that real estate agents call commanding, and I felt like a caged animal. The city spread out below me like a circuit board, all lights and patterns and logic, but up here in my ivory tower, nothing made sense anymore. That's when the pounding started. Not a polite knock. Not a doorbell. Actual pounding, like someone was trying to break down my door with their bare fists. The kind of desperate hammering that says emergency or police raid or ex-wife having a complete mental breakdown. I checked my watch. 11:45 p.m. Classy. Through the peephole, I could see her. Sophia Monroe, though I guess technically she was still Sophia Kwan for another few hours, standing in my hallway looking like she'd been through a blender. Her usually perfect makeup was streaked down her cheeks in black rivers. Her hair, which normally looked like she'd just stepped out of a salon, was doing this wild thing where half of it had escaped whatever she'd used to hold it back. And she was still wearing that engagement ring, the diamond catching the hallway light like a tiny spotlight announcing her betrayal. But here's the thing that really got me. She looked small. Sophia's never been tall, but she's got this presence that makes her seem bigger than she actually is. Command presence, they call it in the military. The ability to walk into a room and have everyone automatically assume you're in charge. Tonight, she looked like a lost kid who'd wandered away from her parents at the mall. I opened the door. "Please, Adrian," she whispered, and her voice was this broken thing that didn't sound anything like the confident CEO who'd been giving TED Talks and gracing magazine covers. "Don't do this." I leaned against the doorframe, not inviting her in, not closing the door. Just watching this woman I'd been married to for 7 years fall apart in my hallway. "Don't do what exactly?" "You know what." She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, and I noticed her mascara had left black smudges on her sleeve. "The accounts, the cards, the payroll. Elena told me about the letter." "Oh, so you got my terms." "They're insane, Adrian. $473,000? For business expenses?" I almost laughed. "Business expenses? Sophia, you charged a weekend at the Four Seasons to the company because you said you needed to recharge your creative energy. You bought a $12,000 handbag and claimed it was a networking tool. You hired a personal trainer and called it executive wellness. Those were legitimate. The fuck they were." The profanity just slipped out, and Sophia actually flinched. I don't curse much, never saw the point, but sometimes a situation calls for precision language. "You've been treating Leoratech like your personal piggy bank for 3 years, and now you're pissed that someone finally noticed." She stepped closer, and I could smell her perfume, that expensive stuff that costs more per ounce than most people make in a day. It used to drive me crazy in a good way. Now it just made me tired. "This isn't about the money," she said. "This is about yesterday. About Damien." "Is it?" "I know how it looked, but you don't understand the situation. We were going to tell you. The engagement was it was supposed to be temporary. A business arrangement." Now I did laugh, and it came out harsh and bitter. "A business arrangement. Right. Is that what you call making out with another man in front of half our employees?" Her face crumpled. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Damien was supposed to propose quietly, and then we were going to use the engagement to leverage the merger talks with his company. It was strategic, Adrian. You know how these things work. Strategic. I repeated the word like it tasted bad. You got engaged to another man as a business strategy. It wasn't real. The engagement wasn't real. It was a way to test you. And there it was. The line that made me want to put my fist through the wall. "Test me? Test me how exactly?" "To see if you'd fight for me." The words came out in a rush, like she'd been practicing them. "To see if you still cared enough to get angry, to make a scene, to do something. Anything. We've been drifting apart for months, Adrian. You work 18-hour days. You barely talk to me. You act like I'm just another employee instead of your wife. I thought if I made you jealous, if I made you think you were losing me, maybe you'd remember why you married me in the first place." I stared at her for a long moment, processing this information. My wife had gotten engaged to another man to test my devotion. My wife had humiliated me in front of our entire company because she wanted to see if I cared enough to fight back. "Well," I said finally, "congratulations. You tested me. And now you know exactly how much fight I have left." "Adrian, please. You know what the really fucked up part is, Sophia? If you just talked to me, if you just said, 'Hey, I feel like we're growing apart. Maybe we should work on our marriage,' I would have listened. I would have made changes. I would have fought for us." I pushed off from the doorframe and took a step back into my apartment. "But you didn't do that. You decided to play games. You decided to manipulate me, to humiliate me, to test me like I was some kind of lab rat. And then you want to stand here and tell me it wasn't real. The engagement wasn't real, but the feelings, stop." I held up a hand. "Just stop. You want to know what's real? This conversation is real. That ring on your finger is real. The fact that you're standing in my hallway at midnight crying about consequences is real." She looked down at the engagement ring like she'd forgotten it was there. "I could give it back. I could make a public statement, say it was all a misunderstanding. We could use this, Adrian. We could use the drama to generate publicity for the company. People love a good redemption story. Jesus Christ, Sophia. Even now, even standing here with your marriage falling apart, you're thinking about publicity angles. It's what I do. It's who I am. No, I said. It's who you've become. And it's not someone I want to be married to anymore. She started crying harder then. These ugly, choking sobs that probably would have broken my heart yesterday. Today they just made me tired. I'll sign your letter, she whispered. I'll resign. I'll pay back the money. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't end us like this. Not over a stupid mistake. I looked at this woman who'd shared my bed for 7 years, who knew how I liked my coffee and which side of the bed I preferred, and the fact that I talk in my sleep when I'm stressed. This woman who'd just admitted to orchestrating an elaborate psychological manipulation because she thought it would be more effective than having an honest conversation. It's already ended, Sophia. This is just the paperwork. I started to close the door, then stopped. Oh, and Sophia, next time you want to test someone's love, maybe don't do it in front of a crowd with cameras. Some things can't be undone, no matter how sorry you are afterward. I closed the door and turned the deadbolt. Behind me, I could hear her sobbing in the hallway for a few more minutes before the sound of her heels clicking away toward the elevator. I poured myself another scotch and stood at the window, looking out at the city that never sleeps. Tomorrow was going to be interesting. Here's something they don't teach you in business school. The best boardroom battles aren't won with PowerPoint presentations or market analysis. They're won by the guy who controls the money and has the biggest set of balls. And this morning, wearing a navy Tom Ford suit and the tie Sophia gave me for our 3rd anniversary, poetic irony at its finest, I was about to remind 12 very important people exactly who owns this circus. The Leoratech boardroom is one of those intimidating spaces designed to make people feel like they're conducting serious business. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls that overlook Manhattan, a conference table that probably cost more than most people's houses, and enough chrome and leather to outfit a luxury car dealership. The kind of room where billion-dollar deals get made and careers get destroyed, sometimes in the same conversation that I walked in at exactly 9 a.m., because punctuality is power, and surveyed my audience. 12 directors sat around that massive table like nervous disciples waiting for their Messiah to show up. Janet Cross, our CFO, was clicking her pen in that rapid-fire pattern she does when she's stressed. Click, 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 pause. Click, 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 pause. Like a nervous metronome counting down to disaster. Marcus Webb, our lead investor from Goldman Sachs, was scrolling through his phone with the kind of focused intensity that said he was probably reading very unflattering articles about us. Dr. Patricia Huang, our head of R&D, looked like she hadn't slept in days. And sitting at the far end of the table, looking like she'd been dressed by a team of crisis management consultants, was my soon-to-be ex-wife. Sophia had pulled herself together since last night's hallway breakdown. Perfect makeup hiding the evidence of her midnight crying session, hair styled within an inch of its life, and a conservative black suit that screamed, responsible executive having a very bad week. She was clutching a manila envelope like it contained her last will and testament, which, come to think of it, it basically did. I took my seat at the head of the table. Because yes, I sit at the head of the table, because I own 83% of this company, and looked around the room with the kind of calm that comes from knowing you hold all the cards. Good morning, I said, setting my own folder on the table. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. I know yesterday's events have raised some questions, and I thought it was time we cleared the air. Marcus Webb cleared his throat. Adrian, we need to discuss the operational issues. The payroll freeze, the suspended accounts, the canceled investor summit. Our portfolio companies don't typically. Before we get to that, I interrupted, I think we need to establish some basic facts about Leoratech's ownership structure and leadership hierarchy. There seems to be some confusion in the market. I opened my folder and pulled out the incorporation documents, spreading them across the table like I was dealing cards. Leoratech was founded 7 years ago by me, Adrian Kwan. I provided the initial capital, developed the core technology, and filed all the foundational patents. I currently own 83% of the company. Dr. Huang leaned forward. Adrian, we all know you're the majority shareholder, but do we? I turned to face the board. Because yesterday I watched TechCrunch publish an article calling Sophia the visionary behind Leoratech's revolutionary platform. Last month, Forbes profiled her as the CEO who's redefining enterprise software. And 3 weeks ago, she gave a keynote at the Digital Innovation Summit where she talked about her company and her vision for the future. The pen clicking stopped. Janet's face had gone pale. Now, I understand that Sophia has been an excellent public face for the company. She's articulate, charismatic, and very good at explaining complex technology to people who don't understand it. But there's a difference between being a spokesperson and being a founder. I stood up and walked to the whiteboard. Because yes, we have a whiteboard in our fancy boardroom. Because sometimes you need to draw pictures for people who make millions of dollars but can't grasp basic concepts. Let me break this down in terms everyone can understand. I grabbed a marker and started writing numbers. Leoratech generated $1.2 billion in revenue last year. Of that, approximately $900 million came directly from licenses and implementations of patents that I developed and filed. Another $200 million came from consulting services based on proprietary algorithms that I created. The remaining $100 million came from various partnerships and integrations. More numbers went on the board. In the same period, Leoratech spent $557 million on operations. Of that, $340 million went to legitimate business expenses, salaries, equipment, office space, actual business development. The remaining $217 million went to what I generously call executive lifestyle management. I turned back to the board. Artisanal coffee bars in every office. A corporate jet that's used more for weekend getaways than business travel. Executive retreats to tropical locations where the most strenuous activity is poolside networking. A marketing budget that's somehow larger than our R&D budget, despite the fact that our technology sells itself. Marcus was scribbling notes furiously. Dr. Huang looked like she was doing math in her head and not liking the results. Now, I continued, let's talk about yesterday's events. At approximately 9:15 a.m., while I was attempting to surprise my wife with Valentine's gifts, I discovered that she had become engaged to Damien Locke, CEO of Nexus Dynamics, our primary competitor. This engagement was announced publicly, in our lobby, in front of our employees, and was recorded by multiple devices. The silence in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. As majority owner, and as someone with a fiduciary duty to protect shareholder interests, I immediately implemented emergency financial protocols to prevent any potential conflicts of interest or misuse of company resources. These protocols will remain in place until we can ensure that Leoratech's interests are being protected. I walked back to my seat but didn't sit down. Power move. Force everyone to look up at you. Which brings us to today's agenda item. I nodded toward Sophia. The resignation of our current CEO and the appointment of new leadership. Sophia stood up slowly, still clutching that manila envelope. When she spoke, her voice sounded like broken glass trying to form words. I, Sophia Monroe, hereby resign as Chief Executive Officer of Leoratech, effective immediately. She opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I also want to make a public statement acknowledging that Adrian Kwan is the founder, majority owner, and true architect of Leoratech's success. I have served as the public face of the company, but I was never its creator or visionary. She set the paper on the table like she was placing flowers on a grave. I take full responsibility for any confusion about the company's leadership structure, and I apologize to the board, our employees, and our investors for any damage my actions may have caused. The confession landed like a nuclear bomb in the middle of that pristine boardroom. Marcus Webb actually dropped his pen. Dr. Huang's mouth fell open. Janet was staring at the paper like it might spontaneously combust. Furthermore, Sophia continued, I acknowledge that certain personal expenses may have been inappropriately charged to company accounts, and I commit to working with our financial team to identify and repay any such charges. She sat down heavily, like her legs had given out. I let the silence stretch for a full 30 seconds before speaking. Thank you, Sophia. I accept your resignation. I turned to the board. I'm assuming the role of CEO and Financial Oversight Director, effective immediately. Any expenditures over $10,000 will require my personal approval. Any contracts or partnerships will require board review. Any public statements about company direction or strategy will come through me. Dr. Huang raised her hand like she was in school. What about Damien Locke? What about Nexus Dynamics? Damien Locke is permanently banned from any involvement with Liortech Business. Any existing partnerships or collaborations with Nexus Dynamics are terminated as of today. We'll honor existing contracts, but there will be no new agreements. Marcus finally found his voice. Adrian, this is a significant change in leadership structure. The investors will want to see a transition plan, stability metrics. The investors, I said, sitting down and folding my hands, will get exactly what they've always wanted. A company run by the person who actually built it. Liortech just became a lot more stable, not less. I looked around the table at 12 very expensive people who were slowly realizing that their understanding of this company had been fundamentally wrong for 7 years. Any other questions? The silence told me everything I needed to know. Good. Let's get to work. You know what's funny about crisis management consultants? They're like interior decorators for disasters. They want everything to look pretty and coordinated, even when your life is burning down around you. Which is why, 3 hours after my boardroom coup, I was sitting in a cramped conference room with 2 overpaid PR specialists who kept using phrases like narrative control and reputation rehabilitation. We need to soften this, said Miranda Cole, a 40-something blonde who probably charged more per hour than most people make in a month. She was wearing one of those power suits that screams, "I went to Wharton and I want you to know it." And she'd been talking nonstop for 20 minutes about messaging strategy. Soften what exactly? I asked, because apparently I'm a glutton for punishment. The whole situation. The divorce, the engagement, the leadership change. Right now it looks like a soap opera. We need to make it look like a carefully planned transition. Her partner, some guy named Brad who looked like he'd stepped out of a men's magazine and talked like he'd swallowed a marketing textbook, nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. We craft a narrative about natural evolution, mutual respect, amicable separation. Make Sophia look like a visionary who's stepping back to pursue new opportunities. I looked at these two and wondered if they'd been dropped on their heads as children. Let me get this straight, I said. You want me to lie? You want me to pretend that my wife didn't publicly humiliate me, didn't embezzle company funds, and didn't get engaged to our biggest competitor while I was standing in the lobby holding flowers? Miranda leaned forward with the kind of earnest expression that probably worked on naive startup founders. We want you to control the narrative before someone else does. Right now, you look like a vengeful ex-husband who's using his business position to punish his wife. That's not good for anyone. I am a vengeful ex-husband using my business position to punish my wife, I said. That's literally exactly what's happening here. Why would I pretend otherwise? Brad jumped in with his consultant voice. Because perception is reality in the business world, Adrian. It doesn't matter what actually happened. It matters what people think happened. I stared at him for a long moment, then stood up and walked to the window. We were in one of those generic conference rooms that corporate lawyers love. Beige walls, fluorescent lighting, furniture that looks like it was designed by a committee of accountants. The kind of place where souls go to die. You know what? I said, turning back to face them. You're fired. Miranda blinked. Excuse me. You're fired. Both of you. Send me your bill, and don't let the door hit you on the way out. They gathered their laptops and their dignity and left without another word. Crisis management consultants might be expensive, but they know when they've been dismissed. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in a coffee shop on the Upper West Side that didn't care if I was worth $500 million or living paycheck to paycheck. Just black coffee, worn leather chairs, and the kind of anonymity you can only find in a city of 8 million people. Sophia walked in looking like she was going to her own execution. Gone was the power suit from the boardroom. Instead, she was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. No makeup to hide the dark circles under her eyes. She looked like the woman I'd married 7 years ago, before the magazine covers and TED Talks and executive lifestyle management. She sat down across from me without ordering anything. The PR people said you fired them, she said. Yep. What? Because they wanted me to lie about what happened. And I'm done lying. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her purse and slid it across the table. I wrote a statement. For the press release. I unfolded it and read. It was exactly the kind of corporate poetry that Miranda and Brad would have loved. Phrases like mutual decision to pursue separate paths and deep respect for our shared accomplishments, an exciting new chapter in both our personal and professional lives. Pure, grade A bullshit that I folded the paper back up and handed it to her. No, Adrian, no. I'm not signing off on some fairy tale that makes you look like a visionary and me look like a supportive partner. That's not what happened. I pulled out my phone and opened a new note. Here's what we're going to say. I started typing, reading aloud as I wrote. Leoratech announces a change in leadership structure, effective immediately. Adrian Kwan, founder and majority owner of Leoratech, has assumed the role of Chief Executive Officer. Sophia Monroe has resigned from her position as CEO to pursue other opportunities. Sophia was shaking her head. That makes me sound like I was fired. You were fired. By your husband, for sleeping with the competition. But I'm being generous and calling it a resignation. Adrian, please. I held up a hand and kept typing. Mr. Kwan founded Leoratech 7 years ago and has been the primary architect of its technology platform and business strategy. Ms. Monroe served as the public face of the company during its growth phase. The transition reflects Leoratech's evolution into a more technically focused organization under its founder's direct leadership. I looked up at her. That's it. Simple, factual, and true. It doesn't explain anything. People are going to ask questions. Let them ask. The truth isn't complicated, Sophia. You got caught embezzling and cheating, and now you're facing consequences. Everything else is just noise. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. What about the engagement? What about Damien? What about him? People saw the video. It's all over social media. They're going to want to know how that fits into the timeline. I shrugged. That's between you and Damien. Leoratech's statement is about Leoratech business. Your personal life is your personal problem. But if you don't address it, people are going to assume what actually happened. That my wife got engaged to another man while she was still married to me, and that I responded by taking control of the company I built. Which is exactly what happened. I finished typing and showed her the screen. This goes out at 5 p.m. today. You can issue your own statement if you want to explain yourself, but this is Leoratech's official position. She read it again, her face getting paler with each word. This is going to destroy my reputation. Your reputation destroyed itself yesterday morning. I'm just declining to help rebuild it. Adrian, I know you're angry. I'm not angry anymore, I said, and realized it was true. I was angry last night. This morning I was furious. But right now I'm just tired. Tired of pretending, tired of letting you take credit for my work, tired of being the technical guy while you play CEO. I stood up and left a 20 on the table for coffee I hadn't finished. The statement goes out at 5. If you want to add anything, you've got until 4:30. What if I refuse to sign it? Then it goes out without your signature. And tomorrow I start talking to journalists about the $473,000 in fraudulent expenses. Your choice. I walked out of that coffee shop and into the afternoon Manhattan chaos, leaving my soon-to-be ex-wife sitting alone with a statement that told the truth for the first time in years. It's exactly 5 p.m. The press release went live. By 5:30, my phone was ringing off the hook with interview requests. By 6 p.m., TechCrunch had posted an article calling me the hidden genius behind Leoratech's success. By 8 p.m., Forbes wanted to do a cover story. Sophia's phone, I imagined, had gone very quiet very quickly. Funny how the truth works that way. You know what nobody tells you about becoming suddenly famous in the tech world? Everyone wants a piece of you, and 90% of them are complete vultures. 2 weeks after my press release turned Leoratech's leadership structure upside down, I was sitting in meetings with venture capitalists who pronounced my name wrong, startup founders who wanted me to validate their half-baked ideas, and reporters who kept asking if I was okay after my very public divorce. But then, on a Tuesday morning that started like any other, I got an email that actually made me sit up and pay attention. Mr. Kwan. It began, my name is Layla Park, and 6 months ago your ex-wife told me my idea was interesting but not commercially viable. I think she was wrong. Would you be willing to give me 30 minutes to prove it? Attached was a pitch deck for something called Neuron Layer, an AI platform that could analyze emotional nuance in real-time communication. Not the usual AI will solve everything bullshit that every startup was peddling, but actual technical innovation with real-world applications that I'd never heard of. Layla Park, which was intriguing. In the tech world, especially in New York, everyone knows everyone, or at least pretends to. But this woman had somehow stayed under my radar while building something that looked genuinely revolutionary. I emailed back. Thursday, 2 p.m. My office. But then I changed my mind. Leoratech's offices were still too connected to Sophia, too full of champagne fountains and artisanal coffee bars, and the lingering scent of executive lifestyle management. If I was going to look at something real, something new, I wanted to do it somewhere that felt authentic, which is how I found myself standing in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn, breathing air that smelled like coffee beans and machine oil, and the particular energy that comes from people actually building things instead of just talking about building things. Layla Park turned out to be 27 years old, 5'0", with the kind of focused intensity that made you pay attention even when she was just shaking your hand. She was wearing jeans and a t-shirt that had actual coffee stains on it, not the kind of carefully curated casual that tech executives wear to prove they're one of the people, but the real thing. The uniform of someone who'd been coding for 18 hours straight and forgotten that food exists. "Mr. Kwan," she said, leading me through a space that was part office, part laboratory, part controlled chaos. "Thank you for coming out here. I know it's not exactly Manhattan corporate. That's exactly why I wanted to come here," I said, looking around at workstations that were obviously built for function over form, whiteboards covered in actual equations instead of marketing slogans, and a coffee setup that involved a single, ancient machine instead of a barista who charged more per latte than most people make in an hour. The team was small. Maybe 15 people, all young, all looking like they'd rather be coding than eating or sleeping or dealing with whatever existential crisis was currently trending on social media. The kind of people who built things because they couldn't help themselves, not because they wanted to get rich and famous. "Show me what you've got," I said. Layla walked me over to a workstation where 3 monitors displayed what looked like a conversation analysis in real time. Traditional AI can parse language for keywords, sentiment, basic emotional indicators, she explained, her hands moving as she talked. But it misses the nuance. The difference between genuine enthusiasm and polite agreement. The gap between what someone says and what they actually mean. She pulled up a demo, a customer service chat where the AI was analyzing not just the words being typed, but the rhythm of the typing, the pause patterns, the subtle linguistic choices that revealed frustration, confusion, genuine satisfaction. "This is a live customer service interaction," she said. "Watch the emotional mapping." On the screen, colors shifted and flowed as the conversation progressed. Green for genuine satisfaction, yellow for mild confusion, red for building frustration. But more than that, the AI was tracking micro-patterns, identifying the exact moment when a customer went from slightly annoyed to ready to cancel their subscription. "Jesus," I said, because sometimes technical elegance just hits you in the gut. You're reading between the lines in real time. Exactly. And not just in customer service. Imagine this in therapy sessions, helping therapists identify when a patient is minimizing their problems. In negotiations, helping lawyers understand when the other side is bluffing. In education, helping teachers know when a student is genuinely confused versus just not paying attention. I watched the demo run through scenario after scenario, and each one made more sense than the last. This wasn't some pie-in-the-sky AI fantasy. This was practical, immediate, useful technology that could be implemented tomorrow. "What did Sophia say when you pitched this?" I asked. Layla's expression darkened. She said emotional intelligence couldn't be quantified, that the technology was interesting but not commercially viable, and that Leoratech was focused on more scalable solutions. Then she spent 20 minutes telling me about some champagne fountain they were installing in the executive conference room. I laughed, not the bitter laugh I'd been doing a lot of lately, but actual amusement. Yeah, that sounds like Sophia. She never understood that the best technology solves real problems instead of creating pretty presentations. "The thing is," Layla continued, "I know this works. We've been running pilots with 3 companies for 6 months. Customer satisfaction is up 30%. Employee retention is up 20%, and one of our pilot companies increased their sales conversion rate by 45% just by understanding emotional context in their client interactions." She pulled out a tablet and showed me the metrics. Real numbers, real results, real impact. The kind of data that made investors write checks and competitors start panicking. "What do you need?" I asked. "Funding to scale the platform, partnerships with companies that actually want to solve problems, and a board seat for someone who understands that technology should make people's lives better, not just make PowerPoint presentations look impressive. I looked around the warehouse again, at the team of brilliant kids who were building something that could change how humans communicate, at the workstations that prioritized function over form, at the energy of people who believe they could actually make the world better through code. $25 million for 40% and a board seat, I said. Layla blinked. What? $25 million for 40% equity and a board seat. Standard terms. I'll have my lawyers draft the paperwork by Friday. The warehouse went quiet. Not the nervous quiet of people afraid they're about to get fired, but the stunned quiet of people who've just realized their dreams are about to become reality. Mr. Kwan, Layla said, are you serious? Dead serious. But I have conditions. Her face got cautious. What kind of conditions? No champagne fountains. No artisanal coffee bars. No executive retreats to tropical locations. No marble lobbies or ice sculptures or any of the bullshit that turns a tech company into a lifestyle brand. You keep doing what you're doing, building things that matter. The team erupted in cheers. Someone might have actually cried. Diego Ramos, one of the senior engineers who'd somehow escaped the Leora Tech corporate culture wars, was grinning like he'd won the lottery. Also, I added, you're hiring Elena Vargas as your operations manager. She's been working for people who don't appreciate intelligence and dedication. I think she'd fit in better here. As I walked back to my car, leaving behind a warehouse full of brilliant people who were about to change the world, I realized something. For the first time in years, I felt like I was building something real instead of just managing something pretty. Sophia could keep her champagne fountains. I had something better. I had the future. Here's something nobody tells you about being worth $500 million. Eventually, you realize that marble countertops and floor-to-ceiling windows and views that make real estate agents weep don't actually make you happy. They just make you expensive. Which is why, 6 weeks after nuking my marriage and taking back my company, I was standing in the empty penthouse that used to be my home, watching movers wrap my life in bubble wrap and cardboard. The penthouse had been Sophia's idea, of course. We need a space that reflects our success, she'd said, which translated to, I want a place that makes other people jealous when they see it on Instagram. 34 floors above Manhattan, 3,000 square feet of aggressively modern design, and enough marble to outfit a small mausoleum. The kind of place where you're afraid to put your feet up because everything costs more than most people's cars. But as I watched the movers tape up boxes and dismantle furniture that I'd never actually liked, I felt lighter. Like I was shedding skin that had never quite fit right. Sir, one of the movers, a guy named Carlos who'd been doing this job for 20 years and had the arms to prove it, gestured toward the kitchen. What about the espresso machine? I looked at the chrome monstrosity that took up half the counter space and required a PhD in mechanical engineering to operate. Sophia had bought it because some lifestyle blogger said it was essential for the modern executive. I'd used it maybe twice, and both times I'd ended up just going to the deli downstairs for actual coffee. Leave it, I said. The new owners can figure out what to do with it. 3 hours later, I was standing in what was about to become my new home, a 2-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side that cost about 1/10 of what the penthouse had been worth. Hardwood floors that creaked in all the right places, windows that actually opened, and a kitchen where you could make coffee without a computer science degree. The building was one of those pre-war places that had actual character instead of designer character. My neighbors weren't investment bankers or corporate lawyers or people who introduced themselves by mentioning their net worth. They were teachers and artists and grad students and people who held the elevator for strangers and said, thank you, when you did the same. Mrs. Chen from 4B brought me homemade dumplings on my first day. Welcome to the building, she said, like it was perfectly normal to feed your neighbors instead of pretending they didn't exist. When I told her I was between jobs, technically true, she didn't ask what I did before or how much money I made. She just said the dumplings were better reheated in a pan, not the microwave. That first night, sitting on my couch, an actual comfortable couch, not some designer torture device that looked good in magazines. Eating Mrs. Chen's dumplings and listening to the sounds of people living actual lives instead of performing success, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, peace, which is probably why, when Columbia University called 3 days later, I didn't hang up immediately. Mr. Kwan, said Dr. Margaret Torres, chair of the computer science department. We'd like to offer you a visiting professorship. One class per semester, graduate level, focus on practical applications of emerging technologies. Teaching. When was the last time I'd thought about teaching? Probably never, if I'm being honest. My career had been about building things, selling things, scaling things. The idea of standing in front of a classroom and actually explaining concepts instead of just implementing them felt completely foreign. What would I be teaching? I asked. Whatever you want. Your expertise in AI implementation, your experience with large-scale system architecture, your insights into turning research into viable products. The students need to hear from someone who's actually built things instead of just studying them. I thought about it for exactly 30 seconds. I'll do it. 2 weeks later, I was standing in front of 23 graduate students who looked like they'd been living on coffee and determination for the past 6 months. Which, let's be honest, they probably had. Graduate school in computer science is basically an endurance test disguised as education. Good morning, I said, looking out at faces that ranged from cautiously optimistic to completely exhausted. I'm Adrian Kwan, and before we start, let me tell you what this class isn't going to be about. I wrote on the whiteboard. Yes, an actual whiteboard, not some fancy digital display. Theory without application. Code without purpose. Innovation without impact. This class is about building things that matter. Not building things that look impressive on your resume or make investors write checks, but building things that actually solve real problems for real people. A hand shot up. Student in the back row, wearing a hoodie that had definitely seen better days. Professor Kwan, what's the difference between innovation and impact? Good question. I pointed to her. What's your name? Aria Nguyen. Aria, how many of you have spent the last semester working on projects that you know will never be used by anyone except your professors? About half the hands in the room went up. Honest kids, that's innovation without impact. You're solving theoretical problems with elegant solutions that will live and die in academic papers. Nothing wrong with that, but it's not what this class is about. I walked over to the window, looked out at the campus where students were hurrying between classes, probably stressing about deadlines and job interviews, and whether they'd ever actually use anything they were learning. Impact is when a 30-year-old single mother in Detroit uses your software to manage her small business more efficiently, so she can spend more time with her kids. Impact is when a therapist in rural Montana can better understand their patients because your AI helps them recognize emotional patterns they might have missed. Impact is when technology makes someone's life genuinely better, not just more convenient. Another hand. This one from a tall kid in the front row who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. Tund Okafor, he said, introducing himself with a slight Nigerian accent. How do you balance impact with profitability? I mean, helping people is great, but companies need to make money to survive. Smart question. The kind that showed he was thinking beyond the classroom. Tund, here's something the business world doesn't want you to know. The most profitable companies are usually the ones that solve real problems really well. Everything else is just marketing. I spent the next hour talking about neuron layer, about identifying genuine needs versus manufactured ones, about the difference between building technology that improves people's lives and building technology that just makes their problems more expensive. After class, Aria and Tund stayed behind. Professor Kwan, Aria said, that single mother in Detroit you mentioned, is that a real example? Not yet, I said, but it could be. That's what we're going to work on this semester. Tund was taking notes in a worn notebook that looked like it had survived several academic wars. You really think we can build something that matters? I don't think you can, I said. I know you can. The question is whether you want to. Walking home that evening, past the Korean restaurant where the owner remembered how I liked my bulgogi, past the bookstore where they knew I was working my way through their entire philosophy section, past the park where kids played pickup basketball and nobody cared what anyone did for a living, I realized something. This was what success actually looked like. Not marble countertops or champagne fountains or magazine covers. Just people doing meaningful work, treating each other with basic human decency, and building things that made the world a little bit better. My phone buzzed. Text message from Elena, who was settling in beautifully at Neuron Layer. The Microsoft deal went through. Layla says to tell you the team wants to take you out to celebrate. Somewhere with actual food, not a networking event. I smiled and typed back. I know just the place. Living quietly, it turns out, is a skill. For the first time in maybe a decade, I wasn't checking my phone every 30 seconds or scheduling meetings that could have been emails or pretending to care about quarterly projections that were really just elaborate guessing games. Instead, I was grading papers from students who actually wanted to learn something, drinking coffee that came from a machine I could operate without an engineering degree, and discovering that Manhattan has actual neighborhoods where people know each other's names 0.6 months after the Great Leoritech implosion. My life had settled into something that felt suspiciously like contentment. Teach Tuesday and Thursday mornings, spend afternoons working with Layla's team on projects that might actually change the world, evenings reading books that had nothing to do with business strategy or market disruption or any of the other buzzwords that pass for wisdom in corporate America. I was sitting in my favorite chair, an actual comfortable chair that I'd bought because it was comfortable, not because it would look good in photos, reading a biography of Richard Feynman and thinking about how to explain quantum computing to graduate students when the doorbell rang. The mail carrier, a woman named Rosa who'd been delivering to this building for 15 years and knew everyone's coffee preferences, handed me a stack of bills and catalogs and one envelope that made me stop in the hallway. Cream-colored paper, expensive weight, handwritten address in careful script. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. 7 years of marriage teaches you things like that. Sophia. I stood there for a long moment, holding that letter like it might explode. Part of me wanted to throw it away unopened, let whatever she had to say disappear into the New York City waste management system along with all the other garbage. But curiosity won out, like it usually does. Back in my apartment, I opened the envelope carefully, because apparently I'm the kind of person who still respects good stationery, even when it comes from people who've betrayed me. The letter was 3 pages long, written in the same careful script on matching paper. Real paper, the kind that costs more per sheet than most people spend on lunch. Even in exile, Sophia maintained her standards. Adrian, I don't expect you to read this, but I needed to write it. Therapy. Yes, I'm in therapy now. Dr. Miranda Castellanos in Portland, if you're wondering, says that sometimes we need to say things out loud, even if the other person never hears them. But I'm hoping you'll hear this. I'm in Portland now. Teaching coding to kids who can't afford computers, working with a nonprofit that refurbishes old laptops and gets them to families who need them. It's not glamorous work. There are no magazine covers or TED Talks or networking events with artisanal cheese boards. Just kids who want to learn and computers that crash more often than they work, and the kind of satisfaction that doesn't photograph well for Instagram, that I had to stop reading and pour myself a cup of coffee. Portland. Teaching kids. The woman who used to complain about flying commercial was now apparently working with nonprofit organizations and refurbished computers. The funny thing is, I'm good at it. Not good at teaching. I'm still learning that part, but good at connecting with these kids. They don't care that I used to be on magazine covers or that I know how to work a room full of investors. They care that I can show them how to write code that does something useful, how to solve problems that matter to them. Last week, a 15-year-old named Marcus built an app that helps his grandmother track her medications. Nothing fancy, just a simple reminder system with a user interface designed for someone with arthritis. It's not going to change the world or make anyone rich, but it's going to help one person live a little easier. And watching Marcus demo it to the class, seeing how proud he was of building something that mattered, I understood something I should have figured out years ago. You tried to teach me this, didn't you? The difference between being important and being authentic. Between building things that look impressive and building things that actually work. Between performing success and actually achieving it. I set the letter down and walked to the window. Outside, Mrs. Chun was tending to the small garden she'd somehow convinced the building management to let her plant in the courtyard. Nothing fancy, just tomatoes and herbs and flowers that made the space feel alive instead of just functional. I know this doesn't excuse what I did. I know saying sorry doesn't undo the humiliation or the betrayal or the fact that I spent 3 years treating your company like my personal piggy bank. I know that getting engaged to Damien while you were standing in the lobby with flowers is probably the most selfish, cruel thing I've ever done to another human being, but I want you to know that it wasn't calculated. It wasn't some master plan to hurt you or steal your company or manipulate the situation to my advantage. It was just stupidity. The kind of stupidity that comes from believing your own press releases, from thinking that the character you play in public is the same as the person you actually are. Damien and I lasted exactly 6 weeks after you froze the accounts. Turns out that a relationship built on mutual ambition and strategic networking doesn't hold up well when one person becomes a cautionary tale and the other person realizes they're dating someone with no actual skills. He's moved on to someone who can actually help his career. I've moved on to kids who think coding is magic. I laughed despite myself. 6 weeks. Their great romance, their strategic partnership, their whatever the hell it was had lasted 6 weeks once the money and the glamour and the mutual benefit disappeared. That I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect us to be friends or to have coffee and catch up on old times. I don't even expect you to finish reading this letter. But I wanted you to know that your example, your actual example, not the version of you I created in my head to justify my behavior, has been haunting me for 6 months. Every time one of these kids shows me something they've built, every time I see genuine excitement about solving a real problem instead of impressing an audience, I think about you standing in that boardroom, calmly explaining the difference between creating value and performing success. I think about all the times you tried to show me that same difference, and how I was too busy playing CEO to notice that. I hope you're building things that matter. I hope you're working with people who appreciate your brain instead of just your bank account. I hope you found the kind of satisfaction that doesn't need an audience to validate it. That I hope you're happy. Sophia P.S. Elena sent me pictures of the Neuron Layer launch event. It looks like everything Leoratech should have been. People who care about the work more than the party. I'm glad you found them. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. Outside, the afternoon light was starting to fade, and I could hear the sounds of people coming home from work, kids playing in the courtyard, the gentle chaos of a neighborhood where people actually lived instead of just existing. The truth was, I didn't know how I felt about Sophia's letter. Angry? Relieved? Sad? Maybe all of those things, or maybe none of them. Maybe the most honest response was just acknowledgement. She'd said what she needed to say, and I'd heard it. And that was enough. That I filed the letter in my desk drawer, next to the incorporation papers for Leoratech and the patent documents and all the other artifacts of a life I used to live. Not because I was keeping it as evidence or planning to frame it or anything dramatic like that. Just because some things deserve to be preserved, even when you're not sure. WHY.my phone buzzed. Text from Tund, my star student who was working on an AI system to help small farmers optimize crop rotation. Professor Kwan, the Ghana pilot program results are in. 23% increase in crop yield. The farmers want to expand the system to 3 more villages. I smiled and typed back. Excellent work. Let's talk about scaling on Thursday. Real problems, real solutions, real impact. Just like we talked about in class, sometimes the best revenge is just living well. You know what winning actually looks like. It's not applause or magazine covers or ice sculptures shaped like your company logo. It's standing in your office, your real office, not some marble temple to corporate excess. Watching people solve problems that mattered. I was back at Leoratech, but it looked nothing like the place Sophia had turned into her personal stage. Gone were the champagne fountains and artisanal coffee bars and networking lounges that served no purpose except burning money. Instead, the space hummed with the sound of actual work. Keyboards clicking, code compiling, engineers collaborating on solutions instead of posing for LinkedIn photos. Janet Cross walked by, no longer clicking her pen like a nervous metronome. She'd thrived under actual financial guardrails, turned out. Amazing what happens when someone gives you clear rules instead of vague suggestions about brand building and executive presence. My phone buzzed. Layla, texting from Neuron Layer's new offices. Microsoft deal is official. 3-year contract, $127 million. Also, Elena says hi and wants to know if you're free for dinner Thursday. Somewhere that serves actual food, not networking opportunities. I smiled and typed back. Tell Elena yes, and congratulations on changing the world. That afternoon, I walked through Columbia's campus to my advanced AI ethics class. Ari Nguyen had just defended her thesis on algorithmic bias in healthcare, work that MIT was already trying to recruit her for. Tund Okafor's crop optimization system was expanding to 12 African countries, helping farmers increase yields while reducing environmental impact. Real work. Real impact. Real people solving real problems. That evening, I stood at my apartment window, watching Central Park settle into darkness 34 floors below. No, wait, I wasn't 34 floors up anymore. I was on the 8th floor of a building where people knew each other's names, where Mrs. Chen still brought me dumplings, where success was measured in satisfied customers and students who changed the world instead of press coverage and quarterly projections. My phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. Mr. Kwan, this is Sarah Martinez from TechCrunch. We're doing a follow-up piece on the Leora Tech transition. How would you define success now compared to a year ago? I looked around my comfortable apartment, thought about my students defending dissertations that would help millions of people, considered the quiet satisfaction of building things that mattered instead of things that impressed. Success, I said, is when you don't need an audience to validate your accomplishments. When the work speaks for itself, and the impact matters more than the applause. That's unexpectedly philosophical for a tech CEO. Maybe that's the problem with how we define leadership in this industry. After I hung up, I poured myself a small glass of that 25-year-old Glendronach and sat in my comfortable chair with a book about quantum mechanics. Outside, the city continued its eternal dance of ambition and dreams and people trying to make something of themselves. But for the first time in years, I wasn't part of that frantic energy. I was exactly where I belonged, doing exactly what I was meant to do, with people who valued substance over style. My phone buzzed one more time. Elena, sending a photo from Neuron Layer's celebration dinner. 20-something brilliant engineers raising glasses of beer, grinning like they'd just discovered fire. The caption read, "Thank you for showing us what real success looks like." I smiled and turned off my phone. Some victories don't need documentation. They just need to be real. Outside, Manhattan glittered with a million stories of people chasing their definitions of winning. But up here, in a quiet apartment where the coffee came from a simple machine and the furniture was chosen for comfort instead of status, I'd found something better than winning. I'd found peace. And in a city that never sleeps, in an industry that never stops performing, in a world that confuses noise with progress, peace was the rarest victory of all. The war was over. The battlefield was quiet. And for the first time in years, Adrian Kwan was exactly where he belonged.